Okay. So this one's a little bit different, right? Any thoughts? We'll kind of use the same mapping tiers, big picture, what is known, knowledge gap, critical need. How does this one lay out? Any volunteers? Yeah, Jennifer.
It's a little out of order. So it starts with the big picture, then it addresses the knowledge gap, then it addresses what is known, and then the critical need.
Yeah, so all right, so let's focus first on the big, actually any more volunteers? Any other insights? Okay, so let's talk about the big picture. What is the big picture here? So globally, alcohol causes more than 3.3 million deaths each year. All right, so that's globally. Then we focus into Tanzania. Alcohol is the leading avoidable risk factor responsible for 4% of deaths. Okay, now that's getting more specific, but is it the study population? Yes?
It's not clear what the study population is. Is it death due to chronic alcoholism, trauma?
Yeah, so we really haven't honed in on the exact population that we're going to study, and that's what you need to do in this first sentence. So if you're talking about cardiac arrest, make sure that you're talking about, what's the initial rhythm, what's the population? Are these out-of-hospital cardiac arrests? Are they in-hospital cardiac arrests, for example? It needs to all be laid out, by the end of that kind of big picture sentence, okay? And then we also want to, and we've talked a little bit about kind of death, but no other kind of morbidities or DALYs or something like that could be measurable. Okay, what about kind of what is known? How is that laid out, and where is it laid out? So that second sentence says, in many low-resource settings, such as Tanzania, treatment for harmful alcohol use is not readily available, and rapidly adapting testing and implementing evidence-based treatments are imperative to curb this growing public health threat. Okay, so that sentence actually kind of does two things. The first half of it starts to get into what is known, right? The second half of it points out kind of a critical need, I think, maybe. And then it says that the proposal is going to fill this gap right up front. You can put that there. Often it goes in the second paragraph. So then it's also kind of, there's a lot of work in the second paragraph talking about, by definition, those reporting harmful alcohol use have a very high risk of repeated alcohol-related harms and could benefit from an intervention to reduce alcohol use during a teachable moment when, with the culmination of consequences, they are most likely to change their behavior. Then it goes on to talk about brief interventions and administered at an ED use. This seems to be, to my assessment, kind of a lot more of kind of what is known. Okay. What about the knowledge gap? Where's the knowledge gap? Did anybody find the knowledge gap?
I think it's in the first paragraph where they say rapidly adapting, testing, and implementing the evidence-based treatments are imperative to curb this growing public health threat. Maybe?
Yeah, maybe. I didn't know what to, I filed that as kind of the critical need. But I feel like the gap is not a knowledge gap that's pointed out. It's a service gap. Like this type of stuff, these type of interventions are not available. So in my mind, there isn't really a knowledge gap kind of in there. So thinking about kind of, I might have said like, instead, it is not known whether or not a brief intervention, which has been shown to work in like resourced settings, could be effective in a low resource emergency department, something like that. So that at least is we've got something that works in the U.S. could this also work in this low resource setting? You know, that would be a knowledge gap statement. But yeah, I really struggled to find a knowledge gap. And then the critical need, we already said, is kind of the second half of that second to last sentence. Sorry about that wording in the first paragraph. But there's also more critical need here. I think this last sentence here, this proposal responds to calls to action by Lancet, Nature, and the WHO to improve global mental health by reducing harmful and hazardous alcohol use. You know, I think based on what we know already from Brandon's presentation, that maybe that sentence might go at the end of the specific aims page instead. But kind of this sentence is arguing from authority, you know, that this is important, okay? But it's really kind of implicit rather than explicit. And remember, your grant reviewers have a lot of grants to review, and so you don't want to have anything implied. It needs to be explicit because they are scanning. So critical need, I might have said, there's a critical need to determine the effectiveness and optimal delivery modality of an ED-based brief alcohol intervention in a low resource setting. Responding, and then you can say responding directly to blah, you know, Lancet, WHO, for calls for evidence-based reduction. All right, so that's the problem too, and this is kind of how I coded it when I went through it. But you know, interestingly, what's missing is red, and that's the knowledge gap. And I think that would be a major red flag as a reviewer. All right, so let's quickly move into the next phase. This is typically the second paragraph or the second kind of section of the aims, and we refer to this as the solution. And it's kind of a bridging paragraph that takes you from the problem to the aims. So it's kind of, it's reasonably narrow as a bridge. And you start by talking about the overarching goal of your research program, not your grant, but like, I'm an investigator and I'm interested in improving neurological outcomes following cardiac arrest. You know, I'm looking for new ways to do this. You know, that's the goal of my research program. And then you're going to talk about the objective of the proposal and how it addresses the gaps and critical needs raised in your first paragraph. Then you need to convince your reviewer that this is feasible, okay? And so, you know, what existing data out there suggests that this is the right thing to be studying at this moment in time? And then explicit kind of look at your hypothesis, and then we talk about your approach and a little bit more about feasibility. Okay, so we're going to go back to the PE proposal, and let's do 2 minutes on this. Okay, just try to get back a little bit of time here. Why don't you read the, I guess this would be starting with recent advances through my long-term goal, that paragraph, those 2 paragraphs, read those. We'll give you 3 minutes, and then we'll go through it, and then we'll spend less time on the second one. I'll send you my K award. Yeah, it's so bad. Yeah, my K award was so bad. It's sciences. let's come back together. All right, so thoughts on how these two paragraphs address the solutions bridge or align with the solutions bridge? Yeah, in the back.
The sex differences kind of felt for me, came out of this, when we were reading the specific themes, we talked about the 20% of patients were missed, with initial evaluation, so in general, so I was a bit surprised that then we're talking about.
Cool. Yeah, so did everybody hear that? So, so as she was reading about the sex differences, she hadn't really kind of learned about them in that first paragraph. And so I would actually, and why is that? Like, what is that second paragraph about? Yeah.
Like to me, the overarching research question or overarching goal has always been something I've struggled with. And so it seems like that's in the second paragraph, and more of the actual approach information is in the top paragraph. So it seemed just kind of following through it seemed a little bit confusing to me.
Yeah, so you could argue actually, and Brandon and I kind of, Brandon kind of put this slide together, but I would maybe argue that the second paragraph is really kind of part of the funnel, the problem funnel in some ways, right? Rather than kind of the solution. So most of that stuff in that first paragraph, to my mind, is the funnel, except possibly the last sentence, right? We will address this gap using a multinational patient-level data set more than 10 times larger than in prior studies. So that is an approach, in my mind, and maybe a sentence about feasibility. We've got the data. We have access to the data that can help answer this. All right, so what about, where is the overarching program goal? It's right there, right? It's underlined. My long-term goal. And the goal is to become an independently funded physician scientist with expertise measuring and improving physician diagnostic. So that's a personal goal for us, and that for me would have been like perfect for a training grant. But I might have like said, this is the problem that keeps me up at night, that I want more efficient, more kind of personalized approaches to diagnosing pulmonary embolism in the emergency department to improve outcomes for my patients. Something like that, an overall scientific goal. And you might drop in that you want to be, you're focused on biomarkers, for example. Or, in this case, it's not biomarker development, it's actually clinical decision rule development. Great. Is the hypothesis in there? Yep, it's right there and it's underlined, right? So our central hypothesis is that biologic sex is independently associated with differences in D-dimer concentration. Okay, and that's a hypothesis that can be tested. So that's great. And then what about approach and feasibility? I already mentioned that I thought we will address this gap using the multinational patient-level data set was a statement on feasibility and approach. Anything else in there? Yeah, Jennifer.
The rationale.
Yeah, the rationale kind of is helping us kind of understand that this is a kind of the next logical kind of refinement. Thoughts from our experts, either Colin, Phil, Alice.
I think we should be doing it.
Should we fund this?
Yeah, I don't find the sex differences, I think as you go on, you read more and more grants, it's not uncommon where the first paragraph sets the problem and the unmet need, like you said, and then the second paragraph introduces what they're actually.
Like a refinement.
Yeah, a refinement, in a sense it is their solution, right?
Yeah.
Because if you were gonna say, I'm gonna solve all the problems with D-dimer and PE testing, there'd be a lot of skepticism about that. But sort of introducing, okay, what we're gonna talk about here is specifically how can we adjust this for sex? So I like it.
Yeah, I mean, I think, it's a very innovative, we have sex differences in other biomarkers. Why not D-dimer? Why aren't we talking about this? Yeah.
Yeah, I guess my question was like, how important is it to mention that in the, I mean, clearly not because it was funded, but mention like if in the specific aims or giving some type of background, like background in relation to that, or is providing the general information and then jumping into like, how likely is that gonna be a part of the convention is my question.
Yeah, I think you want to point out kind of why this is a big problem. Like, why should we study sex differences? And it's because, Brandon thinks that it contributes to kind of the lack of specificity or accuracy, I think overall accuracy of D-dimer. And if we can improve the accuracy of the D-dimer, of the application of D-dimer, then we're going to have all these savings, whether it's mortality, morbidity, or cost savings, which maybe he's not going to mention an NIH proposal. But yeah, I think I would want to get that up front really early, and kind of set the stage for kind of the sex differences. Brendan.
This was funded only for being not funded 5 times. So they were like, part of getting funded is having a good enough grant and also getting really lucky with your reviewer. So it's not like this is the recipe for how I get funded, because I did take a very similar grant and filed a review before I grant. Right? So this is like all the best opinions you can take from different people on how to make your grant competitive, but it's not. I think the feedback would have definitely made it stronger, but I'm not sure there's one thing we can latch onto that made it funded versus just knowing that was interesting but not compelling.
Yeah.
Yeah, I have a couple things to add. Really quick question, was this funded, this version? Okay, yeah. So I want you guys to know, so I'm a reviewer for SAEM for nearly 10 years now. These 2 examples are excellent. So you were like really picking
Oh, yeah.
2 amazing specific aids. I just wanted you guys to know that. So I love, yeah, both of these are great. This one is good. Formatting is so important. It's not wordy, and Brandon's specific aid is really easy to follow, so you can pay attention to it, right? First it's broad, and then, it gets a little bit like that funnel, gets a little bit more specific, and what he did so well is that he underlined my long-term goals, objective, central hypothesis, rationale. All of you guys should need to do that. Because we were saying we are reading 10 grants in one night, and we're usually exhausted after a shift. So, and we need to present this to everybody. So when you make our job easier, we are gonna like the grant. All right, so make sure so this is a great example, and, excellent that we're sharing this with everybody here. Yeah, highlight it, and also in the back, I want to, you guys mind, talk about the grant here, Dr. Satan. So when you read a lot of these implementation science and methods, where they're doing a lot of treatments that are kind of complicated, she did an excellent job to them. It's usually hard. A lot of times when they're complicated, it loses our focus and interest when it's too complicated. So I like that she put the significance and column at the top and described the method in the middle. So that's my thought.
All right, so great. It would be useful, and we were going to do this, but I think we'll leave this to you. Why don't you guys, on your own time, take a look at the second grant and look at the solution bridge and see if you can code it yourself, okay? And I think that would be a useful exercise for, and there might be some discussion. So we can talk about, if you look at this like during one of the breaks and you want to talk about it with any of the faculty, feel free. I want to thank Brandon for, sacrificing his aims to this process. It's a little bit like group therapy, I think, all right? So thank you very much.
All right, so in the interest of time, we're going to the actual aims aims now. All right. This next 2 slides could also take like 2 hours. How do you write actual aims? And I'm not going to try in the next 10 minutes to tell you to write perfect aims, but I think there are some suggestions. You want to say what you're going to do, give a very brief summary of how you're going to do it, and if it's a hypothesis involving aim, state your hypothesis. The reviewers are going to want to see that. If it's a qualitative aim or it's some exploratory aim that you're going kind of down a rabbit hole in aim 3, that's fine, I guess I'd say, but put a structure that reviewers sort of know what to look for. Use action words, right? You're going to discover something, you're going to elucidate something, you're going to generate something. You're probably not going to describe or summarize or gather or, right? You want your reviewers to come away from this saying, oh, this person's doing something cool, man. Not just, well, they're going to collect some stuff. I don't know if that's really going to advance the science. Obviously, be specific aims. Like you want them to know exactly what you're going to do in that aim. And then lastly, and probably this is be worth discussing this afternoon in some of our free time, your aims should be connected. They should have some conceptual alignment, right? So let's say I'm doing a project on sepsis and I want to improve the equity and accuracy of sepsis prediction and treatment. And let's say I have an aim 1 where I create a new EHR prediction model for sepsis. Aim 2 is to characterize the performance of current sepsis protocols, and aim 3 is to see how that new model would function within our existing framework. Those all share one overarching conceptual idea. Another one, so those are not necessarily interdependent. Let's say you have a project on stroke where your aim 1 is to identify and validate a novel biomarker for distinguishing ischemic stroke from stroke mimics. And your aim 2 is to take an existing stroke model and add that biomarker and see how well that test performs with your new biomarker. What's the potential risk there? Are you guaranteed to identify and validate a novel stroke biomarker? You're not. So if that fails, your aim 2 will go nowhere because you don't have a novel biomarker. On my prior version, saying you're going to generate some EHR prediction model for sepsis, well, it might not be a good model, but I think reviewers will probably say, well, you will make a model of some sort. This trips up more people than you'd like to think. So this is where mentors can be super helpful. I'm going to quickly go through this, right? So you can see on my grant what my aims were. I won't read them all, but the short version is I try to have pretty succinct, bolded aims. I had the hypothesis after each one. I try to make the hypothesis testable. I did not a great job at aim 2. I compared stuff. Oh my God. How boring is comparing stuff, right? I could have clearly picked a better action word there. Again, happy to talk about these more in depth, but this was my approach. On Dr. Staten's grant, she determined, which I don't know, I probably wouldn't determine, I would elucidate or discover something, but she has nicely described hypotheses and then also describes potential biologic, alcohol use, or psychosocial mediators and moderators of intervention effectiveness. That's in both aims, you see. I suspect that was responding to a particular element in the NOFO stating that they were looking for proposals that would address biologic, alcohol use, or psychosocial mediators or moderators. And she made that very clear that that was something that they were going to address. So then, how do you end? You end with the reverse funnel, right? So what do you expect to achieve with this?
And so what? So what do you, if you do get those results, then what can that help you do? How does that get you closer to advancing the science, to curing disease, to saving the world? We're not saving the world yet, but how would this get you closer? For many of the pilot studies or the pilot grants we talked about, part of this is going to be, I'm going to put in another grant, right? But this is going to allow me to submit that next grant, to study the next step of this. It's going to allow me to, make some novel risk score that I couldn't do without the results from this grant. It could be that you've studied the implementation of a new program in one hospital, and now you're going to do a multi-center implementation of that. Link those clearly to the mission of the funder. Again, David mentioned things that are implicit versus explicit. You would like to explicitly state how this achieves the goal of your funder. And then just like any good stand-up routine, you want to link at the very end to the problem you described at the very top of the AIMS page. And so it all kind of comes full circle. You have those copies. I'll say, we'll briefly go over these, but then I think really I want to get us into the small groups. My payoff paragraph was not great. This is still something I feel like of the parts of the AIMS that I am good or bad at, this is not one of my strengths. I think Dr. Staten's payoff paragraph was excellent because she clearly says what they're going to achieve, and that specifically responds to NIAAA strategic priorities, and that after this project, they'll be prepared to do X, to implement this validated, effective, and low-cost intervention in this and other settings. So again, this is a process, right? Don't expect to have a good AIMS page after your 5th or 10th time, right? Try it, get some feedback, try it again, take a week off, come back to it with some fresh eyes. This is a marathon, it's not a sprint. Yes?
Can I just make one comment about
Please.
Back to Staten's? I think we heard before something about the fact that there is a good knowledge gap in this grant. And I don't know, I feel like here it's pretty clear it's a different type of knowledge gap, right? It's an implementation knowledge gap, right? We don't know how best to do this. We know that we should be doing something, but we don't know what are the components, and that you see that in our aims and our payoff. Is it the short intervention? Is it the text message? Is it the personalized text message? What combination of those things?
Yeah, I think, I guess my comment would be that she buried it.
She what?
She buried it.
A little bit,
And
yeah.
I would put it up front before I lose him, before the reviewer loses interest, to make sure that we know that there's something missing, because otherwise I don't know how far I'm gonna get into it, so.
Another really important thing was come out in your small groups is interdependent names, right? It is the bane of almost every grant writer's. What does that mean for aims to be interdependent? What strategies can you employ to avoid your grants having interdependent aims, right? I mean, I think almost all of us, I know my first grant that I wrote, the second two aims were entirely dependent
Totally.
on the first aim being successful. And I handed it to someone, and luckily they were like, yeah, so if aim one doesn't work out, I guess we give all the money back, right? Yeah, I'm like, oh crap. So I think it's really, really important that comes up.
And you might feel that first name's inevitable, and I've written that grant many times, where it's like, of course, they're gonna be able to see that, of course we're gonna be able to achieve this. We have the data, we just need to do the analysis, so where's the risk there? And then, yeah, it all falls apart. So it's an art to write those kind of related but not dependent aims. And, yeah.
So we have 6 tables in here. There are going to be 7 groups. I'm going to take the 7th group to International A, but if the faculty want to look and see what number they are, we're just going to go, so this is table 1, 2, 3, 4, 5, 6 in the back. And then all the participants, I believe, whose names I had from SAEM are here, and I made them as tiny as possible, so you could not see them. If your name is not on here, come find me. We'll get you into a group. We went a little over on this last session. We have basically an hour and 10 minutes to have small groups.
1, 2, 3, and how about that?
And then to the left, 4, to the right, yes. And if you're in group 7, if you can help me find where International A is, I don't know where it is yet.
Yes, except for this year was great. So I think it's possible. Let's just. All right, well, we'll get started. Welcome back from lunch. My job here is to rev you up, so we're as energetic this afternoon as we were the morning. And I'm going to talk about, I've called it nuts and bolts, because it's kind of a mishmash of everything. Applying for grants, study sections, how grants are scored, et cetera. I introduced myself before, but briefly, I'm Colin Greineder. I'm an associate professor at Michigan. My long and varied path is sort of a good example of how many of us don't have the sort of traditional path when we decide to do academic emergency medicine. But I have about, like many of the other experts on the panel, in this session, I have 10 years of experience reviewing grants for EM study sections. I'm now the grants committee chair for SAMF. And I have submitted applications to pretty much everything you can imagine. Foundation, VC, and then, as I was telling my small group before, I'm up to 7 different institutes within the NIH. So, and I have a basic science laboratory, basic and translational science, I would say. I'm a pharmacologist as well as an EM doctor, and then I also have a clinical research group that does implementation science mostly. So I span a number of different areas. This is, okay, great, joint disclosure slide, I guess. My disclosure here is that I'm the co-founder of this company in Boston. It's a small biotech company that is commercializing one of the technologies we developed in my lab. Oh, there it is, okay. So you've decided to apply for a grant. What should you do first? Well, the good news is I didn't realize that Brendan was going to go over the acronyms of RFA and NOFO, but now you know what those are. I'll just add that NOFO is the sort of umbrella term, right? Everything from the NIH is considered a NOFO. RFA is a little bit more specific. That means they are actually asking for specific applications. So just so you know, you'll hear people talk about, oh, did you see the RFA on blah, right? As opposed to NOFO, which is just sort of like the R01 NOFO and the R21 NOFO, et cetera. All right, first thing you should do, without a doubt, is figure out, are you eligible and what are the key dates, okay? Because I do both foundation and NIH grant review, I'm going to try to balance this and go over both, okay, because I think they're somewhat different. Obviously, there are parallels. So this is the front page of our SAMF grant portfolio here. And then also I'll talk about NIH stuff, okay? So this would be the 2 places that you want to go and find on the internet and read these well in advance of when you're planning to apply. And I'll particularly highlight this research training grant, and notice here, this is another important acronym, the FON, or funding opportunity. So here I actually have K08, which is PA24182, but I'm going to talk about one of the other ones. So let's start with the SAMF first. So you want to apply for the research training grant, right? What do you do next? You read the eligibility of the award, okay? First thing, actually even before this, Be a faculty member, okay, so that's one thing. Have an advanced doctoral degree, imagine that includes MD or PhD, so I think everybody in this room probably qualifies. Hold a university appointment or an adjunct appointment in a division or department of emergency medicine or pediatric emergency medicine. Remember, do not apply if you're not eligible. Every year at SAMF, we get at least 2 or 3 grant proposals, and the people have completed the entire grant proposal and gotten letters of support and had their BAs, send it to their Office of Research Services and all that kind of stuff, and they're not eligible. So we just administratively triage them. So don't make that mistake. Read your eligibility. Also, read the rest of it, because there are key details here, right? This is a research training grant. Well, what happens if you've already had an institutional K? If you already have an institutional K or some other training grant, that does matter. We do care about that. So we have specific language about that here. Make sure you do not submit something that does not match these criteria, okay? Again, happens every single year. So simple things, common pitfalls. Here's another one. This is the R21 NOFO, PA 25304, okay? They have a list of institutes. If you go to this, now actually this just changed about 2 months ago, but for years, NHLBI has not participated in the R21 NOFO. I can tell you 5 times probably in the last 10 years, somebody has come to me and said, I've got this great idea for an R21, blah, blah, blah. What? This looks very like cardiac arrest, or, this is about heart failure. What institute are you planning on sending this to? NHLBI, you can't write an R21. Now, it turns out that they just issued a notice, it's down here somewhere, in March, that they're now again participating in the parent NOFO for R21, so that's great, but just make sure that you've read through these things, okay? You don't want to get far along and make this mistake. Know which institutes participate. Okay, so the other thing that's going to be on this, if you read through this, and it is a bit like reading like a legal document, but it's not that bad. It's all in language that you can understand. Here's a really high yield table. These are the application due dates. So know your dates, okay? For R21, this is R21. It's June, it's the 16th, right? So whether it's June or it's October or it's February, there are 3 times a year and it's always the 16th. KO8s are always the 12th. RO1s are always the 5th. Okay, and by the way, this is when they actually have to go from ORSP to the NIH, right? So I'm writing an RO1 right now, and my deadline is the 25th of May, because I have to get it to, we'll talk about that in a little bit, but you always want to subtract a couple days from these dates. For SAMF, by the way, we're open right now, so all of our funding opportunities are open. Should look and see, they're due August 1st, and for EMF, it's mid-December, although now, recently, last couple of years, we've been requiring letters of intent early and screening using that mechanism. And please, interrupt me if you have any questions. All right, so now you've decided you want to write a grant, you've read the stuff, you know you're eligible, you know the dates. What next? Okay, well, you need to know how to apply for a grant at your institution. Remember, you do not submit grants. Your institution submits grants. So that also happens. Occasionally, somebody tries to apply for a grant as themselves. Remember, that is not allowed, right? The University of Michigan is submitting your grant. You are just the person, the recipient of that grant. All right, they must review and approve. So how does that work? Well, you're going to have an idea for your proposal, and you want to have that a long way in advance of the deadline. This says 3 to 12 months. I would say it's probably should be more like 6 to 12 months, and sometimes it's 2 years ahead of time. Okay, so you have your idea. Then what? Well, at the University of Michigan, we have an intake form. I'm going to show that to you guys. Not every place probably has the formalized process, although I think everybody should, right? I think all departments should go to this, and we'll talk about what the advantages of that are. So you file this form. That allows the research infrastructure of your department to know that you're planning on applying. Okay, so then what? Well, shortly after that, they'll reach out and say, I see you're planning on applying for KO8. Let's sit down and meet and discuss this. This meeting needs to happen about 2 months before the deadline, okay? This does not happen 2 weeks before the deadline. So meet with your business administrators. They are critical. Without them, you will not succeed at submitting your grant. They will be completing an admin shell. We'll talk about what that is, and that will get submitted 3 weeks before the grant deadline, okay? So those are documents that actually go into ORSP well before your grant itself does. Now, it's the science documents, your research plan, your specific aims, all that kind of stuff that goes in last. Your vertebrate animals, your human subjects, that is up till about 5 to 10 days, as I mentioned. My deadline is May 25th for a June 5th application. All right, so once you have the admin shell and the scientific docs all collected, your BAs will then route them to your Office of Research Services or whatever they call it. I guess us, it's Office of Research and Sponsored Projects. And then they will send it to the funding agency, right? So no you mailing it off. All right, any questions about this? Good, know that process. I mentioned the intake form. This is what ours looks like at the University of Michigan. It's very simple. Your name, are you the PI? Are we submitting this proposal? Remember, there might be submitted by a different department, and you guys might have a subcontract, or it might be a different institution and you have a subcontract. Your Office of Research Services also needs to know about that. So if somebody contacts us and says, hey, we're at Michigan State, we want to write a grant from you, we're going to give you a subcontract, your ORSP, you cannot just say yes, right? The regents of the University of Michigan have to say yes, and so you need to let your administrators know about this. Who's the prime sponsor? Is, all this about subcontracting. Remember, this is the FON, the announcement number, they want that, what's the sponsor deadline, etc. There's a few more questions, okay? This is a great way of alerting your BAs that you have an intention to submit a grant and provides info for that initial meeting that you have with them 6 to 8 weeks before you submit. Again, if you don't have a formal intake process like this, you should have one. So tell your department that. And if you don't, you just will submit this in whatever other way by sitting down with your BA even a little bit earlier. All right, so what is this admin shell that I was talking about? Well, this is a list of documents that the institution really cares about the most, right? So they're not, honestly, the Office of Research and Sponsored Projects doesn't really care about the details of your science. They care about who's going to get paid what, are we sure that the right people really are going to be there to do the work? Are we sure we're not promising to do something that we don't have the capabilities, the equipment, or the facilities to do? Okay, so you can imagine what's in the admin shell. Number one, the budget and the budget justification. Okay, who's getting paid what and what are people doing? Facilities, resources, and equipment. These are documents that I think all of the mentors will have. I have like 4 versions of them, depending on whether this is basic work, translational work, clinical work, etc. Biosketches, that tends to be institution specific. Some want that as part of the admin shell, some don't. So I was at Penn before Michigan, and biosketches were part of the admin shell. At Michigan, they turn out not to be. One question that often comes up is, do I need to have my science done in order to file my admin shell? Because remember, the admin shell goes in 3 weeks before your grant deadline, right? The answer is no, you don't have to have it done, but you certainly need to have a good sense of it, because you are going to be required to submit your project narrative and your project abstract. Now, the project narrative is a truly 3-sentence layperson definition of what you're doing, so the specifics of the science aren't that important, but the project abstract looks a lot like your specific aims. If any of you have ever gone on to NIH Reporter and started to look at grants, something comes up, that's their project abstract, okay? So that's going to be the public-facing part of your grant. So yes, you don't want to change your science completely, new aims or whatever, after you've already submitted your admin shell. Okay, so what happens after you hit submit? This is now switching gears a little bit to less what you're going to do and more what happens after you do this. Okay, so we talked about, let's say you're applying for an R21, June 16th, okay, you submit it to ORSP at the beginning of June, they get it in. Nothing then happens until November. That's the really frustrating part. And by the way, take these dates with a grain of salt, because they don't always happen, right, this way. As all of us are smiling that do this, we all just had this huge disruption last year. And I mean, I just finished reviewing a set of grants that was submitted like mid-2025. So I felt kind of bad about that. But yes, these are the dates of the scientific merit review. We're going to talk about that, so-called study section. Right? And then notice yet another 2 months passes before the advisory council review, right? So that we'll talk about what that is as well. And then you don't actually get funded until April, okay? So there's almost a year between the time you submit your science and when you're actually going to get any money. That's from the NIH. One of the advantages of applying to alternate sources of funding, we have a talk about that today as well, is that the time turnaround tends to be much faster. Right? So you submit something to EMF in January, we're going to give you a funding notice in April, and you're going to find out in June, right? For SAMF, you submit by August 1st. We do review in October. You're going to have your notice of award in late November, okay? All right. What is scientific merit review? Okay, so this is now a study section. What is a study section? Well, you know, officially an NIH review panel, although there are study sections that are not NIH, so we still call ourselves a study section on, for SAMF. Essentially, these are academic scientists and clinicians that are experts in this area. They're chosen by some process. For the NIH, it's the Scientific Review Officer, or SRO, that does this. And generally, these are people that are funded in the field, right? So, and this is what study section used to look like up until about, I don't know, the pandemic, I guess. A bunch of people with laptops in a pretty hot room in Bethesda somewhere, right? And this is what study sections look like now. Look, everybody's happy and they're on Zoom. No, that's a total lie. The one on the left is definitely not a study section. This is actually a picture of Bible study that I got online. And you can tell it's not a study section because everybody's smiling, and that's not the way it is in real study section. Everybody looks happy and they're there with their partner. That's not how it is, okay? So it's basically just like this, except now everybody's on Zoom. All right. How do you choose the right study section now that you know what they are? Well, you don't choose, okay? The CSR chooses for you. So you make a recommendation. So the front page, essentially, of your NIH grant application will be something called the PHS assignment request form. And you will say, please, I would like you to give me this study section, and then they will make a decision based on whatever they make a decision on. And that is a pretty opaque process. However, it is worth knowing about the different study sections, okay? And this took me a long time. I would say I had been applying for grants for 5 years before I had any clue about how study sections work. And you know, if Jeremy had talked earlier today, and I don't know if Brandon did some of that, talking a lot about how these close relationships you're going to have with your program officers. I mean, I have never had a close relationship with a program officer. They come and they go, and I don't know if I'm just a bad I don't know, grantee or what, but like I think it is important to have some knowledge, but it's not all going to be, you know, super collegial. These are not necessarily going to be your best friends. With that said, I do always meet with an SRO before I apply. And one of the questions I always ask is, which study section should I apply to? Now, they always say the same thing, which we'll talk about in a second. That's not really why I meet with the SRO. The reason for meeting with the SRO is to get their input on your grant, on the science of your grant. But you can ask them what study section you should apply to. Every single time I've done it, they've said the same thing: use the ART, right? Use this tool. And actually, that's because the tool is really excellent. So this is what it looks like. Who's ever actually looked at this? Has anyone used it? Yep. So everybody up front, but it is great. It's basically an AI-based thing. You go here and you just type in your specific aims, or just cut and paste in your specific aims. Even if you don't have a set of specific aims yet, you just have a paragraph about what you think you want to do, or a couple bullet points, you can put it in there, and it will basically spit out, this is what I think your top 3 study sections should be. Okay? Generally very accurate. And by the way, the CSR uses this too. So that's probably where you're going to, if you are strongly recommended to go to a certain study section based on what the ART says, that's probably where you're going to go, even if you request a different one. Any other mentors have anything to add about this? Anybody have different strategies that they use? Okay. All right, ERA Commons. So this is something you're going to spend a lot of time looking at in the future if you start applying to the NIH. My first grant, I think I logged into this every day for like 40 days in a row, waiting to get my score, waiting to get my study section comments. You see all these different panels here. This is the one we use when we do grant review. This is the one you'd use to look at your grant. So what does it look like within here? So if I were to click this status, I'm just pulling up one of, you know, a prior R01 that was funded. It says pending here because this is pending RPPR, but that's a subject for another day. But if you click on this, it'll give you some information about what you were assigned to. So I was assigned to SPSR. Okay, that's what I wanted. That's what I requested. And this gives you a sense of the council meeting date. This is the date that your study section will meet. Oh, no, sorry. This is the council meeting date. Ignore that. This is your study section date. Right? So 6 of 2024. Remember that date, because we'll come back to that later. But again, you can then go, if you didn't know, if you got assigned to a study section that you weren't expecting, you can go and find out what that study section is known for, right? So this was an osteoporosis grant, it was a pharmacologic grant, so makes sense that we got into this study section, and then you can actually look at the list of reviewers. I don't typically do that because it doesn't really matter, but in case you wanted to know who's going to be sitting on your panel, who's likely to be sitting on your panel, it's right there, publicly available. All right, so then what happens? So now you've submitted your grant, and it's been assigned to a study section. What happens in that study section process? Well, the first thing is the SRO, who chose the study section members, looks at everybody's grant and then sends it out to the panel and says, what conflicts of interest do we have? So conflicts of interest are like you're at the same institution as the person, you have a competing grant with them, you've started a company together, you've written a bunch of papers together, you get excluded from those. It is actually you exclude yourself, okay? But it is a pretty high fidelity process. They then choose 3 reviewers per grant, your primary, secondary, and tertiary reviewer, and they then get 6 to 8 weeks to, you might wonder what's happening during this 3 months after I submit my grant before the study section. They are reviewing your proposal, okay? And they will now apply something called the Simplified Review Framework, which we will talk about in a second, and they will give you a score, which we'll also talk about in a second. The bottom line is the 3 scores are averaged, and then that is used to decide which grants are triaged, meaning they will not get discussed at the actual meeting of the study section, versus which ones will be discussed at the panel meeting. Okay? If you don't get discussed at the panel meeting, you don't get a summary statement from the panel, because you were not discussed. But it is not a total loss. You will get the 3 reviews from the 3 reviewers, right? And you can use that as the basis of your critiques, of your revisions, excuse me. You can use those critiques as the basis of your revisions. Of course, it is much better to get discussed. And the reason is because some of the reviewer critiques may be not really that relevant, right? This is just one person's opinion. And so a lot of times if you look at what the study section said in their summary statement and they just completely ignored this big thing that was raised by one of the reviewers, you could probably infer that that didn't get a lot of traction with the study section as a whole. Okay, so of course the goal is to get discussed, but it is not all lost if my first R01 application was triaged. Now there's this new thing, okay, and I hate it. I don't know about how the other experts feel, but this last time period, all of my grants were competitive, not discussed, which is very frustrating, which means you were actually in the top 50. So you weren't one of the 50% that was triaged, but you were still not discussed. I can't say I fully understand what this is, but the NIH has basically said, we're now going to not discuss these as a study section, but we give the institute leadership the option of funding the ones they like. I think that's problematic, deeply problematic. I don't know if other experts have some feelings about it, but just so you know what this is. It actually, the one silver lining is that you actually had reasonably high scores from the 3 reviewers. Otherwise, you would have just been straight not discussed.
Is this different in institutions?
Yes.
My understanding is it's the top 2/3. So it's a middle third, a lower third, and a top third are discussed. So that's a way to triage more.
Yeah, so it's actually, you're correct. It is highly institution specific. And when I'm saying this is actually my personal study section. So I'm on something called Advancing Therapeutics B, and our system is triage the bottom 50, then of the top 50, triage the bottom 50, and then, so it's basically 75% are getting not discussed. Yeah, but there are other institutes that I've heard that it's 2/3, it's 1/3, 1/3, 1/3, and it's the Wild West when it comes to this funding. I have yet to hear from any colleague that they have had a competitive not discussed grant funded. As far as I can tell, it is not fundable. But they say, when they give you that designation, that it could be funded. All right, last topic. How are grants scored? Before I go on, any questions about any of this? I know it's complicated. Yes, Asma. Yeah.
So do you feel like that holds true, or do you feel like maybe, there's sometimes room to just address the reviewers' comments?
Yeah. it's an excellent question. Did everybody hear the question? Do you just have to scrap your grant and start over if you get not discussed, if you get triaged? And I think the answer is absolutely not. I think it highly context dependent. It can be a red flag, okay? And I will tell you that as a mentor, if I have a mentee that has a grant that's not discussed, the first thing I want to know is what were their scores from the reviewers, right? And if their significance, we're going to talk about that now factor one, right? But I'm going to refer to the old scoring criteria. If their significance was the reason why they didn't get discussed, you're in big trouble, right? You need to rewrite your grant because they just didn't fund it, they didn't discuss it because somebody thought it was not significant, right? Whereas if you didn't get discussed because your approach got trashed, that can be totally fixable, right? And I would say it's even more different when talking about training grants, okay? Yeah, so I famously, on my first KO8 application, I got an 8 on environment. My institution was given an 8, and I, got triaged, and I was like, wow. And that was very fixable. Just move to a different institution. There's a whole story there, but that's what I did. Without moving cities, I just moved to a different institution. Okay, so how grants are scored. Okay, so before the any other questions, actually, I should say. That was a great question. Please, I'm covering a lot of stuff here. These slides, I can make them available to you. There's nothing proprietary here at all. Okay. Before January 25th, 2025, we used to have 5 review criteria, right? Significance, investigators, actually, I don't know why I put it in this order. Significance, innovation, investigators, approach, and environment, right? Now we only have 3. So hence, this has been called the SRF, or the Simplified Review Framework. We will now talk about what that is, but basically, there are 3 factors named Factor 1, Factor 2, and Factor 3. Okay? Why did we do this? Okay? Why did the NIH do this? Because it wasn't we. Somebody came down and told us to do this. But I will tell you that SAMF is moving to this year. Okay? We did a pilot last year, and we're moving to this. EMF has already moved to this. Most foundations have moved to this. Right? It's kind of like CMS. Everybody just follows the leader, and the NIH is the leader here. Okay, the goal, of course, is to evaluate the scientific merit, right? And the concern was that there was, I think these are largely things that are going to play well with this audience, because the concern was that there was bias. There was bias towards people that were already funded, right? People that were already known in their field, people that already had established that they could pull off complicated grants, institutions that had already established that. And it wasn't uncommon to hear in study sections, well, I don't know that they can really pull this off. I mean, like, have they ever done anything like this before when talking about a smaller or community-based program? And that has, in my opinion, no place in review at all, right? And so I think this is generally a good thing. As with many things, there may be some unintended consequences, but I would say in general, the reasons for the change to SRF have been good. And I think there was another big issue, which the NIH has laid out, has specified as part of their reason for the switch, and that was because there were 2 independent scoring criteria, significance and innovation. And it was always a little clear what the heck is the difference, right? And the idea is that you could do a non-innovative grant that's very significant. What if you've already established, like we're going to talk about PPK later, the grant that we've already sort of discussed this morning, about an alcohol use disorder intervention, right? And they've already established that. They've already created the intervention. They're just taking the next step. So that might not be innovative, but it's hard to say it's not significant, right? Sometimes taking the next step is highly significant. That's exactly what you should be doing. So in order to eliminate this confusion, they have merged them both into Factor 1. Okay, so now significance and innovation is no more, and now it is Factor 1. And I will tell you that in my NIH study section, we've had 2 cycles now with SRF, and I would say in this most recent cycle of EMF, 75% of the discussion has been about Factor 1. This is the one that matters, okay? Should this work be done? It's pretty obvious why this is the one that's so important. And the question that you should really be asking yourself, and again, if you join one of those study sections, which I'm going to make a pitch for later, you will learn about how this is done, and that's very useful to know when you're actually applying for your own grants. But the question you should be asking is, if these aims were successful, will the work have a sustained impact on the field, right? That's the judge of should it be done. Not, do I think this is going to work or not? It should be, if it does work, right? If they are successful, will it be impactful? Factor 2 So essentially, most of us feel that this has replaced approach. So approach has been folded into factor 2. And now it's, can the work be done well, right? Is it feasible? Okay, that's a hugely important word in grant review. Is it rigorous? And that means both, do they have a good understanding of what's been done in the field before, right? And does it meet scientific rigor in terms of the methodology that's being used? And is it realistic, right? Those three things are really the heart of factor 2. There's no question that before the SRF, most of the discussion used to be about the approach, and now, as I mentioned, this is about 25% of the discussion. So 75, 25, and this one is almost never coming up, okay? Rarely, and that's because factor 3 is not a scorable, it's not a scorable criterion. It's a yes, no. Is it appropriate or not? And if it's not, you have to specify why, and if it is, then you don't say anything. And so the vast majority of the grants that I've seen, I'm curious what others have experienced, is it's 90% yes, right? Occasionally they say, boy, they've never done a clinical trial. There's no one on the panel that's done a clinical trial, and they're proposing a clinical trial to be done in the space of 2 years, like something like that. Usually fairly egregious. All right, any questions about that? Okay, the rubric. And we're at the very end here because I know I'm on time. I'm up to time. So this is a rubric that you will get to know very well no matter what what grant review you do. We use the same one called the NIH scoring rubric. It is a 1 through 9 scale. The 1, 2, and 3 are excellent, right, and highly likely to be funded. I would say 1 and 2 more than 3. 4, 5, and 6 are kind of in the intermediate range. There's some significant problems that need to be addressed, and 7, 8, and 9 are really not going to be funded, right? So many times when you first submit, you get somewhere between, 3s, 4s, and 5s, and the goal is to really get yourself to more 2s and 3s. Okay, same rubric is used by lots of people. So how does it work? Okay, so who scores it, right? So I've already said that the 3 reviewers give you scores on factor 1, 2, and 3, right? When the actual panel meets, after the 3 reviewers have discussed, and there's a whole discussion process, then everybody scores, and they just give 1 score, and that score is between 1 and 9. Okay, that 1 and 9 for the entire panel, so let's say we were a panel, right? There's what, 40 of us, right? That will get averaged across our 40. Everybody's vote counts the same, and then that will become your impact score, okay? So if you got half 3s and half 4s, your impact score will be 35. Obviously, it's multiplied by 10. Okay, that is not the same as your percentage, okay? Your impact score is very important, and that will be reported on ERA Commons. But then that gets converted into a percentile depending on how that study section scored the full cadre of grants that they had to review, right? So there are study sections. I've had some crazy things. I had an impact score of 48 that got a 28th percentile. It's like the study section was mad that day and they wrecked everybody's grant. And then I've had the opposite situation, right? Where you get an impact score of 32 and your percentile is 28. And you're like, geez, okay. So that was the study section that was being very kind on that day. Or maybe they had a lot of strong grants. Okay, last thing, study sections do not make funding decisions. They evaluate the scientific merit. Then there is a second level of review. Remember we mentioned the advisory council. No one really knows who these people are. These are senior scientists and clinicians, institute officials, public representatives. It's kind of a little bit of a black box. But just so you know, after the study section gives you your score, so here's the impact score we got on this grant, we scored well. We got an impact score of 24. That was 6th percentile for this date. And then, where does it say? Then the advisory, so then something else pops up here. The advisory council, and it says, okay, remember this I think was a June review, and then the advisory council was supposed to meet September 2024, and then we got lost in the black hole of NIH, and we didn't actually get a funding decision until October of this past year. So it can be a little crazy. That happens, unfortunately, and it's happening more and more with the dysfunction in the NIH. That is it. Okay, I will turn it over to, I think, Andrew, you're next, right? Talk about significance innovation. Any questions you have about grant review, ask one of us. There's my email address up there. Very quick plug for the SAEM Grants Committee. Please consider joining if you're interested in academic emergency medicine and grant writing. Thank you.
Excellent. Is this like a dual setup? There it is, perfect, found it. All right, well, thank you everyone for your post-lunch attention. If you do fall asleep, I won't hold it against you. We are about a half hour actually behind schedule because we only built in a half hour for lunch. So we'll make this fairly quick. This used to incorporate both the scoring that Colin just updated everybody on, and then how to really craft an effective significance and innovation section. So my name is Andrew Moore. I'm an assistant professor of emergency medicine at Virginia Tech. I wear many hats, including program leadership for our residency, and I dabble in research. I have grant funding from Phillips and Biotel and the SAEM Foundation. So what we're going to talk about in probably the next 15 minutes, because we will skip 3 and 4, we had an exercise that we'll take out. We're going to just really talk about what the significance and innovation mean. We've talked about the score criteria just now, and we'll look at what are you really trying to tell the reviewers, and why do you want this to be such a powerful element of your presentation. So this is what we used to use. You just saw this from Colin. This is the new unified framework. So we're going to focus on the importance, the significance, and the innovation. And this really is the significance is what is the problem that you are trying to address, right? So as Colin said, you could have something that's really significant. You don't have an innovative way to fix it, right? There's no new technology that you're using. There's no new patient group that you're studying, but it's really, really significant. Or you can have a case where it's both significant and innovative. So from a significance perspective, we want to say, what is the problem? So your significance section really should deep dive into the magnitude of the problem. So I did my research training at OHSU. I'm a syncope disciple of Benjamin Sun. And so every time that I write anything about syncope, it starts with syncope is a common and costly problem that impacts 1 to 2% of all ED visits in the US annually. It is estimated to cost $2.3 billion US annually, right? It is all there in that first sentence. You know why this matters. You know what the prevalence is. You know who it impacts. And then we add on, it has been shown that within 30 days of a syncopal or near syncopal event, every patient that presents to the emergency department has a 5% mortality rate, right? Related to major adverse cardiac events. So you really are setting the stage for who is your population, how many people in the US or whatever country you're proposing the research in does it impact, and why do we really care? So you want to have a problem with a little bit of magnitude. All right, you then are going to use a paragraph to summarize the previous research. What's been done? Okay. Have they done this on the population that you want to do it on? Have they done this with a tool that you're going to use? And what does the existing data suggest that you have the ability to fix, right? So you're introducing the problem in paragraph 1. You're really starting to deep dive. This shouldn't be like a full-blown lit review. This should be like, here's the 10 leading papers on this topic that exist, and this is what's guiding my rationale for why I want to do the research that I'm doing. And then describe the impact of your study, right? So how will your specific project improve scientific knowledge or clinical practice? And if successful, how would it change concepts, methods, or treatments that drive this field, right? So I work in wearables for syncope, and unexplained syncope is a major driver of cost in the healthcare system, because for the longest time we would just admit patients. They'd get unnecessary echoes, sometimes they get unnecessary advanced neuroimaging, and we knew that this doesn't really matter. So why is my research important? Because it gives a lower cost method of capturing a potential life-threatening arrhythmia, and I specifically study this in geriatrics in a population that's high risk for a cardiogenic syncope, which can be life-threatening, right? So you spend all this time building up to why does exactly specifically what you're doing impact the world? So that is significance. This should be the bulk of your significance and innovation. Innovation's gonna be significantly shorter in your written statement. Usually, we look at the innovation section as a much tighter, this is how I'm going to change things. I think Brandon likes to say that really only 3 paragraphs for innovation, and you can have up to a page or a page and a half for significance. I had an exercise for you guys, which was to take a K-12 funded study from one of my colleagues that has a 3-page significance in innovations. It got funded. It's a great study, but I was gonna have you pare it down to 1.5 pages, but we're a little bit backlogged on time. So that is your significance. Innovation. This is what's new and different about your solution, right? So how are you going to solve a problem that others failed to solve? When I think about my research and my innovations, all of the syncope research in the past 20 years, major syncope research has been the development of risk stratification tools to predict who is low risk. It's awesome, right? You guys might use the Canadian Syncope Risk Score. You might use the FAINT score if it gets validated, hopefully for Mark's R soon. But it doesn't provide patient-centered outcomes because it doesn't give them a diagnosis. So my innovation is leaning into new technology that allows remote monitoring to actually provide patients with a patient-centered outcome, which is a diagnosis. And then we have the new paradigm, which is, can we use this technology to decrease time to treatment? So how will you solve a problem that others failed to solve? Will you lean into a new technology? Do you have new access to cutting-edge technologies such as video monitoring? So the significance and innovation that Dr. Mays wrote actually combines TBI markers, so TBI markers with a novel camera system that is able to estimate forces of impacts in nursing home falls. So she's leaning into not only novel biomarkers in the brain for elderly TBI patients, but she's saying, I can pair this with this really novel technology that actually will indicate what the force trajectories and vectors are on this patient when they hit their head. And that allows us to correlate this and potentially save billions of dollars for all of our unwitnessed dementia falls who show up at the ER and just get scanned because our clinical decision instruments do not apply to obtunded patients or profoundly elderly patients. So thinking about what you're doing, does it change the context of how we provide day-to-day care, right? Does it challenge existing paradigms in research or clinical care? And then are you gonna lean into a novel concept? I'm gonna use this as an opportunity to pitch the grant review committee. I have sat on that for 6 years now. It is an amazing opportunity to read a ton of grants. And you get to see grants that are really well written, and you get to learn from others' mistakes in terms of how you might craft your own grant submission. But we will often see really significant problems that are being addressed, and then the innovation section will suffer because it's, I'm gonna use an existing database of airway outcomes, right? So like the NEAR database, and you're like, oh, I wish you had come up with an innovative way to think about answering this problem that you want to solve, because that would have taken your score even lower and increased the likelihood of funding. So that is a very rapid review on significance and innovation because we are well behind time. For you guys who are junior grant writers, this text from the American Journal of Surgery is fantastic. So it's Hunter et al. It is literally 3.5 pages. In my grant writing career, I have never read a more packed manuscript. It gives you such a nice breakdown of how you should be thinking about and how you should be shaping your significance and innovation section. And it is well worth your read and should be readily accessible. So with that, if there are any questions, I will take them. Otherwise, we're gonna try to get back on track, and that was a very fast lecture. All right, cool. Yes?
With the new framework for scoring,
Yeah.
have you noticed that people have like combined sections or kind of changed where they're writing about the significance and innovation separately?
I haven't so much,
No,
but
So, see, I think that's, I was thinking as Andrew was talking, the format for your grant hasn't changed, just how it's scored.
just how it's scored.
Typically, people will have their specific aims page, and then I have an introduction, not everybody does that, but significance and innovation as separate sections.
And when you're a grant reviewer, I mean, this is really the hook, I think, that pulls you in. And when you're writing a grant, you want your reviewer to get really excited about what you're doing. And your significance and innovation section is the chance to really pull that reviewer in. And that person is your champion when this goes to panel. And so if they are very excited about it, it tends to, you want a champion, because you want somebody that's really voting for the research that you're doing.
That's true.
So,
There's a lot of different approaches to this too. On my grants, I actually put a significance section for each aim as well. I usually have an overall innovation section, kind of an intro. But there's a lot of different approaches to talking about, but bringing the reviewer's attention to your significant and innovation, you should figure out the best way to do that in your style.
how do you guys feel about, as grant reviewers, how do you feel about the use of bolding or underlining in the significance and innovation section?
Yeah, critical. I think it can be overused, but can be very effective.
My small group knows I like to bold. This is the section where I bold the most. So,
Yeah, did everybody hear what Andrew said too about that? It's one thing I didn't cover when we were talking about study sections, is that the grant is presented by the primary, secondary, tertiary reviewers. The rest of the people on the study section only really read your grant during that 15-minute period. I hate to say it, but like, they will all vote, and they'll all get an equal vote, but they will read your grant for 15 minutes. Everybody, those three will read your grant for oftentimes hours.
Yeah.
And you really, you're gonna be successful if they are coming to the study section to promote and defend your grant.
And I would agree, looking at the, factor 3 now, I think 95% of factor 3 is like, yeah, these people can do this. It's really the outlier where you're like, oh, that's a no. So, really, it puts the correct emphasis on your grant application. So, any other questions? All right, well, with that, we are closer to back on schedule.
Thank you, Andrew, that was awesome.
Rapid fire. All right.
panel as well.
Yeah.
I don't think there's slides.
Oh, there's no slide. Okay, cool.
So, Philip,
Do we have a couple? You might take
We're
one.
just gonna have a person come over and figure out how to set them up.
So our next section, we're going to do a panel discussion on kind of the approach and the rigor and the feasibility sections of the grant. I think I have a list of who was on the panel, but if you guys remember who you were, I think it was Alice, Dr. Moore, Colin will be on the panel. We're going to get some mics working, hopefully, so this will work a little bit more smoothly, and you can hear us. Yeah, do you guys mind sitting up at the front just so, you don't have to necessarily sit either. I'm going to try to cut this in half. I feel like this is an important section, but it's also a difficult section, so we'll go as long as we have good questions. Do we have it? This is the, we're looking for microphones. What, this is the approach section. Yeah, this is the panel discussion.
I just told Stacy we had an hour before the grant review.
Oh, no, this is the section. That's all right, we'll speak loudly. Colin, do you want to come to the front too? This is the,
Dave, if you're able to figure it out.
Yeah, let's see what we can do.
They look like they're turning on, just not like amplifying. Not neither. Sorry, guys, technical challenges. Well, yeah, I mean, we're already on camera, we can project.
We will project loudly. All right, so the main purpose of this section is, so you have the scoring criteria number 1, which is probably the most important because that is the significance innovation. Is this important work to do? But then the second criteria, which is also scored, is your approach and the rigor of that approach. I feel like this is probably the hardest section for us to speak to you about because this is very dependent upon how you do your research and what the standard in your field is. And emergency medicine research is such that that is a very broad concept. As a translational scientist that works in the lab, my approach is very different from somebody who does implementation science or somebody who is doing clinical research. But there are established standards in each of those fields. So I think with this panel, we kind of just wanted to get everybody's impressions on what the most important components of that are to include as you go through and you address that in your individual grant as you're writing this, thinking of how you're speaking to the audience and who is actually reviewing that grant. So I'm going to start off just kind of with some general questions for the faculty in the room, and I want anybody to feel like they can reach out and ask questions that go to these topics too. So we're mostly discussing the approach, the rigor, the feasibility with these questions. So I thought these were questions that we'd had prepared from previous iterations of this, and I'm going to highlight the ones I think are probably the most helpful. So how do reviewers assess whether the proposed methods are appropriate and sufficiently detailed to address the research question on the reviews? As the leaders of the grant review.
I forgot the question to review, the answer. So how do reviewers decide whether the methods are appropriate?
Yeah, the approach is appropriate.
No, it's a really good question, but as Philip mentioned, difficult because I think it's highly dependent on the field.
Yeah.
So I would say the first thing with approach, and we probably talked about this in the subgroups, is the interdependence of aims, right? So that's a big pitfall right there. Moving beyond that though, and sort of diving into the individual aim, you can imagine that in the lab, if it's an animal study, you're going to want to see, and I recognize that this isn't relevant to everyone, but there are lessons that are universally. You're going to want to see that they have some degree of preliminary data to establish feasibility or publication, right? And there's often a question of like, which is more important? How do you use those together? If something is published, you really don't have to make a big deal of it in your grant. You can just cite your publication. If it isn't published, that's really important preliminary data. So within each aim, I usually have at least one figure that's demonstrating that we can do the key assay for that. So I'll just give you for instance. Let's say we're writing a paper about a new drug for traumatic brain injury, right? You want to have evidence that you can do the traumatic brain injury model and that you have reproducible outcomes, right? Why? Well, one, as I mentioned, feasibility, and the other one, rigor. So what do we mean by that? Well, the biggest pitfall in pharmacologic research looking for therapeutic effects is type 1 and type 2 error, right? So if you're not adequately powered, if you have not done a sample size calculation, or if you do not have the data necessary to do a sample size calculation, right? You don't have baseline outcomes and their variance, right? And you haven't then taken that next statistical step and said, we want to be powered to see a 30% decrease in volume loss following traumatic brain injury. So that is often that key figure that I have in that aim to demonstrate we can do this, and or a publication. We can do this, and we have the data in order to have the appropriate rigor within this model.
Dr. Moore, Dr. Shane, how does this change if you're in more clinically focused research?
Yeah, so I work in the clinical research space. Thinking about that, it's, are you choosing an appropriate clinical trial design, right? Is this reasonable for your aim 1 being developing a retrospective cohort to then guide your model with making sure they're not interdependent? That's a major key there. So are you choosing the right clinical trial design? And then I feel like a lot of clinical trials recently, when I think about rigor, have really come into this space where it's like, we're going to take a bunch of data that we collect and throw it into some AI algorithm and shake it up and see what comes out. And so it kind of, there's a
sepsis world examples?
No, not specifically sepsis, but I think, so I am a reviewer for one of the EM journals, and I think this is a huge problem that I see in just manuscripts in general as well, in that researchers will ask a question, for instance, does exposure A cause exposure B? And when the method, you cannot use observational studies to answer that question, right? So it's important that you understand the different methods for research and what type of question that they answer. Yeah, I think that's one of the big things that I see in research is they try to do observational studies to answer a question that's, pre and post or causality study, right? They have to be done by either randomized control trial or cohort studies, right? So I have a master's in public health. If you guys really want to get really good at it, highly recommend getting an MPH because you are learning about biostatistics, and now they teach you how to do data analysis on the computer like R and SAS, and it's so helpful that you can just run studies on your own, and so it's been helpful.
Yeah, and I think this probably I wasn't here in the AM sessions, this probably got beat into the ground. But what I commonly see, what Colin had referenced is if you have preliminary data, right? Either you publish a pilot trial or you have unpublished prelim data, you really need to include that. There's so many amazing grants that we have this amazing idea, and we're gonna collect the information as AIM-1, and then we're gonna analyze it as AIM-2, and it doesn't matter how significant or innovative that research is. If the aims are interdependent, it's almost always going to fail to get funding because everything in AIM-2 or 3 is codependent on you completing AIM-1, and if you fail that, then the whole study is a bust.
So I think this kind of continues in that realm. I was going to ask about pitfalls that you see commonly as reviewers. I think you guys have all mentioned at least one pitfall that you see. But what are some pitfalls as it comes to preliminary data specifically? I mean, everybody has some kind of preliminary data. What are the biggest pitfalls you see for a grant coming through in terms of how the preliminary data is presented? Are there ways to do it better and ways to do it worse?
I mean, I think it needs to tell a cogent story about why you think this preliminary data is sufficient to support your aims. You don't want to obviously just list it. I think that if you have enough data to start to do a power analysis, that should absolutely be in there.
Yeah.
So I see we did study X, we came up with Y. Now we're going to do this next thing, but with no reference to any power analysis from their existing data.
Yeah, I want to add that, so it's tricky about preliminary data because sometimes, for instance, if we're doing big data research, you may have too much preliminary data, and they may say, why do you need funding? You already have your study done, right? So it's really tricky, and as junior faculty, it's a catch-22 because you're trying to get money to get preliminary data when you don't have the protected time. So one way is to ask your mentor. So look for a mentor who may have funding to help you gather preliminary data. And then also other pitfalls for preliminary data is not having any at all. And then Dr. Stanton's research is fantastic because she did a lot of her preliminary data, and you don't want too much of it, but she did just sufficient to show that she's feasible. The study is feasible, and the reason why you want feasibility data often is because there are other studies in that cohort that has it already, and so you're competing against that study that shows, one, your study is, you have the team ready, and two, you have the resources, you have the talent, and also you have everything set up already, and that's why it's so important to have that.
Yeah, I mean, I will just say, I hate to be simplistic about it, but I'm not sure, Alice, I've never said that a grant has too much preliminary data. But I think that oftentimes when that's being said, it's because it's the extraneous. Like, they felt like they wanted to just hit you over the head with all the things they've done, so they're putting in things that are not really relevant, right? It has to be a cogent story, like Andrew said. So don't include data that's not relevant. Obviously, don't have no data. Then you're going to get knocked on feasibility there. But I think those are the two big things, is that it's the wrong preliminary data or you don't have it.
I'm going to just open things up after that point, because I do want to get into feasibility, because I think that's a little bit of a question, but I think the rigor and the approach are kind of the most important components of this, and I want to open it up to the room just to see if there are other questions about that. Oh, yeah.
One more comment, because I realized that Matt and I were having a conversation about a pilot. This comes up often when doing clinical research. Do you need to have done a pilot to show that you can do it? And again, so many of these approach or factor 2 based things really should be coming from your mentors, right?
Yeah.
And you'll routinely see grant reviewers say, I'm alarmed because of all these issues in factor 2, and I'm worried about the level of mentorship that this person had, right? Because we all know that the biggest determinant of success is the quality of your mentorship. If you've got somebody out there and they don't have a good mentor, their grant is not going to succeed, pretty much guaranteed. So we're all sort of looking for that, and these mistakes, like choosing the wrong study design, et cetera. So I think a pilot like that is a really common question, and something that you should be talking to your mentor about, because it's a very context-dependent thing. Sure, if all things being equal, you want to have a pilot, but you also don't want to wait 2 years to get your funding, right? And then end up, like Alice said, not able to continue in academic emergency medicine because you're working 12 times a month, right? So.
No, I think that underscores a great point, that nobody learns to do this in a vacuum on their own, that this is something that's taught, and you need to make sure you have those effective teachers in place to ask these right questions as you start applying for these things. Are there other questions about approach? I know everybody has specific questions about approach, because everybody's approach is going to be unique, but any thoughts from the attendees? Yeah, go ahead.
I mean, I understand that everything is very dynamic with the type of grant that you're writing and reviewing. I just love to know from the panel's perspective, you guys have reviewed a lot more grants. Other than the interdependence, are there any other unique pitfalls that you see very, very commonly that you would recommend early career investigators to be able to avoid?
I mean, yes. I think in our group earlier, we were talking about more significance-based pitfalls. Like, are you really doing something that's going to have high impact on the field? But sticking to just approach, because this is technically about approach, I would say one that I see often in implementation science is a failure to really have established that something is ready for implementation, right? So in order to be ready for implementation science, the science part has to be done. Like, should we do this has already got to be established. And I can't tell you how many times I have read grants, mostly for foundations, to be honest, it happens less at the NIH level, where somebody is looking to implement something and there still is a hypothesis out there about whether this is actually sitting on firm scientific ground. There is a mechanism for that, right? Like type 2 hybrid effectiveness trial, but they don't choose that, right? And so that's a very common pitfall. Any others that you guys can think of?
Yeah. So a huge common pitfall, and I told my group on this, is your problem. I feel that, and if you look at all the grants that get funded, the research question and the problem addressed are extremely focused. So a lot of grants, they try to say, for instance, the PE studies that Brandon showed, he not only talked about PE, but specifically he talked about D-dimer, right? And not just D-dimer, but the sex differences. So, and then also Catherine's study, again, it's on not just, remember she talked about high resources area, we already have solutions to alcohol treatments, but in low income areas, we still don't know, right? So she narrowed on a very specific problem that has not been solved. And I feel that a lot of grants, it's too broad and not narrow enough. The specific aims are, again, too broad, and you're not focusing on tight little issues or problems. So the best grants to me are simple and, straightforward, concise.
Yeah, bring up lots of pitfalls. So biostatistician, right? Like not having adequate statistical expertise for what you're planning on doing, proposing something really complicated, like you're going to analyze GWAS data or big data, and no one there that knows how to do that, and it just sort of sticks out like a sore thumb when you're reading their approach section. Or you mentioned implementation science, or not having clinical trial. There was another one that I was trying to think of just issues where you're missing. Oh, I know, qualitative research. We were talking on my small group about not having anyone that knows how to do mixed methods or qualitative work. Often something that's brought up, like where's the expertise there? Everybody knows that's not difficult. That's not easy work to do, right? So you should bring that person on board. And it's not just like I'm doing it because I have to. It's because they will read your section and be like, oh gosh, we gotta fix this. This is not gonna read right, because they know, right? They've written those grants before.
But even
And-
if you have like the right people on the team, sometimes when you mix too many kind of techniques, you can't find like a study section that can competently review them. So if you have like, mixed methods and, some, implementation kind of in the same grant, that can be difficult too, as far as like finding the right study section.
I think we've qualified this as kind of a feasibility thing, even without me transitioning it already. But I think a lot of these get to questions of feasibility, and these are not just entry-level grant writing sort of pitfalls. These happen to us as well. Like Colin's talking about, if you don't have any expertise on implementation science, you shouldn't put that into your thing. But there's, when we put in big R1s, like if we have a specific technique that we've never published in, we need to make sure we have a co-I or somebody that's on the biosketches that has that well documented, that they do that very well. So these are pitfalls that can happen in any stage of your career as well.
I'll just say that it's not only about getting their biosketch and I agree with Philip, you gotta have their biosketch, you have to have
Sure.
open board, you have to get them to science fast enough.
Yeah.
Right? I would say one of the biggest things we have with our ones is that sometimes we make a decision in the last few weeks, oh gosh, we're really missing this.
Yeah, we're
We
missing,
should add this
you don't
in."
see that hole
But
until.
then there's no time to get the science, because we're still writing it, to the person. This is why you want to be way ahead of schedule.
Yeah.
So you can get it to them, have them read their science, because even if you've got somebody on the panel, if a reviewer reads your science and says, this still looks like
Yeah.
no one that knows about this has read it, they will see right through that. They're like, they probably didn't send it to that expert,
Yep.
right? And, I used to have this talk on the biosketch that I think we've dropped now.
Yeah.
But, another thing that I do then is that I look at the personal statement of the biosketch. Whenever I see that,
Yeah, have they read it,
I don't
or-
really think that
Yeah.
this implementation scientist read, and then you notice that the personal statement doesn't line up with the rest of their grant. That's like a guarantee that person never read that grant,
Yeah.
right? They didn't. Does everyone know what I mean by that? They didn't even tailor the personal statement on their biosketch to your particular grant.
Typically, your co-investigators or people that are on the grant will mold that directly to what you want them to for that grant specifically. So it should be very specific. I think we're getting close to time here, so we can stay on time, but I want to open up if there's any other questions.
Sorry, I had one more. So, kind of timely for the grant that I'm working on. So, can you go too big, even if you have the right co-investigators on your grant, as far as multiple institutions, if you're trying to build a coalition of like demonstration sites, for example? Like, does geography get taken into account? Like, what other sort of logistics from a feasibility perspective do grant reviewers commonly take into account, even if you have a lot of experience on your team?
So you're getting into some areas that are controversial even within grant review. And I think that one of them is, I'm going to break your question into two parts. One is just, is your grant overly ambitious, right? I think we're probably 5 experts here, you're going to have 5 different opinions. I personally think that feedback, when I get that, I'm like, okay, you can call my grant overly ambitious. That's all right,
I'm overly ambitious.
Right. What, am I going to be underly ambitious? Like, I want to be ambitious, right? So I don't really worry too much about that. Occasionally I'll see a grant shot down over that, but usually it's something else, and that's just adding to it. I think what you're referencing, if I understood your question correctly, is other things that are more, perhaps less controversial, and that is, we've got 7 PIs, or we've got 7 co-investigators, and the samples, I reviewed a grant this past cycle where it was like, I think Emory, believe it or not, was were samples coming from Indiana and, Yale and 4 other sites, and there were 7 investigators involved, and it was just like, are they really gonna be, there was no sort of organizational framework, they hadn't really spelled out like who was in charge, and you have opportunities to do this. You get documents like your multi-PI plan. When you write DoD grants, you have to specifically write an organizational chart for how your grant is gonna get done, so you have to be really careful about that.
And even if you
That grant
don't have to,
totally
you should.
sourced. Even if you don't have to, you should,
Yeah.
because we basically were like, this is never gonna happen. I mean, like, who can coordinate a basic science study across 7 institutions? It's not gonna happen. So I think that's what you were asking, if I understood the other side. Especially in the clinical world, right?
In the clinical, I mean, I think especially for the junior members in the room, if you're doing a training grant or you have an external mentor, oftentimes they want to see a track record of some sort of collaboration in the past. I think obviously there's grants that build things like registries, and so in that case, you just basically having your co-PI plan and your established framework in there is going to alleviate a lot of those concerns. Generally, if, maybe you're putting together a group of 7 different sites, if 4 or 5 of those sites have all worked collaboratively in the past with good outcomes, I think those are things that increase the likelihood of funding. It's a little harder when you just pull 7 institutions out of thin air and 7 investigators who've never worked together, and you're like, ha-ha, look what I've created.
There's a reason that, you ever wonder how multi-center grants get funded? They get funded through clinical trial networks, right? So we go to Siren and we pitch Siren, because then our feasibility is Siren.
Yeah.
Like, they're gonna do the trial with me, they've already got the framework set up.
And there are larger mechanisms than NIH that are designed for these, the U Award systems, the P Award, and I'm on a few of these. And when you read through, there is different projects, so you basically write an R01 for each of the projects, but you also have a whole separate R01 that's just the organization structure, the whole consortia. And so that's critical. And you kind of get to the stage where if you have such a large thing that it's getting difficult to explain what all those networks will be in your proposal and like what the structure of it is, maybe you're in the wrong mechanism. Maybe you need to look to a larger sort of consortia type study, depending on what you're doing. Because there are definitely ways to do that kind of science, very large. Some of them require things like the Siren network or something where you have 20 or 30 sites already established with a great working relationship.
Yeah, and there's a huge difference between collaborators and mentors. So let's say you're applying for a K training grant. For instance, you have too many. Like I have 5, and because I'm doing basic science and endothelial cells, and also I have a sepsis, and then also a clinical mentor. And when they say different things, it's a headache. But unfortunately for me, I need to have all of them there. So sometimes it's actually more difficult to have too many. But you definitely, I don't know if you guys agree with me, but I feel like they want 1 or 2 that are your main, and because you're meeting with them constantly. Yeah, and they're providing you with the resources. And then collaborators, that's different.
I want to just call out 3 specific types of grants, and I think as I've sort of progressed to being now sort of the head of, review in certain areas, there are grants that we spend a lot of time thinking about how do we give these fair reviews, and that would be med ed, ultrasound, and global emergency medicine, okay? And I put wilderness in with global, and I'm sorry if you're a wilderness person, like, those aren't the same, but they're sort of austere environment grants, I guess I would say. Like, those are grants that if you're gonna try to write something like that, you really wanna find someone who's had a grant like that before you did, okay? And they don't have to be at your institution, right? We are interested in setting up cross-institutional collaborations within emergency medicine because of what Philip said. We span just an enormous range of, think about us compared to, say, neurology, right? That we span a lot more clinical entities than they do in research areas. So if you're writing one of those, there are a lot of individual pitfalls there. An example would be within global emergency medicine, because I've sat in on those study sections many times, and the reviewers are usually experienced people that have done global work before, and they say they have no one invested from this country. Like, they don't have anyone on this grant that's actually in country, and that's like basically you're doomed.
Yeah.
So there are pitfalls within individual mechanisms. We could talk about ultrasound as well. There's probably at least a couple.
It's always statistics with ultrasound.
Yeah, or are you doing something that has a clinical, clinical outcome, right? Same with med ed, right? Is your outcome education? educational, or is it actually clinical? Like, these are difficult decisions, and you need to strike the right balance between feasibility and impact, and I think you've got to get somebody who knows how to do this and get that funding.
And I think I'm going to draw this to a close with those statements, just because I think that kind of concludes what some of the main points were, which is that look for external support when it comes to these topics, either from mentors or from colleagues that you trust in your field, because these are going to be very unique situations for a lot of this issue of rigor and feasibility and approach. So make sure you're getting very broad perspectives on how yours is addressing those things. So, all right, I think we'll conclude there, and then we will move forward. I think we went too long.
If you guys are applying for the NIH grant, get this book. It's so good because it has all some of the wording in the book already. So it's called The Grant Application Writer's Workbook. It's by NIH, so get this book. Yeah.
While folks are trickling in, I know it's been a long day. I've been a part of this for the last 3 years, and I know what it entails. So this is going to be a little bit more fun and relaxed, not that heavy, and hopefully get ready for the mock, which is after that. And I'm Dr. Arun Kumar. I'm a professor of EM at Wayne State University, and I do a lot of global health, the co-chair of the global health section. And most of my grant is global health related, where funding is minimal. And so I've become an expert in trying to figure out where money is. That's all I've been doing for the last 5 years, is trying to find all the nicks and crannies where monies are kept for grants. And I'll try to share some of those experiences with you all. And again, I don't want it to be completely didactic. So if any of you all have any questions, feel free to raise your hands, and I'll stop and answer any questions. So is it okay if I go ahead and start? Or do you want to wait? Okay, perfect. And I forgot to get my bifocal, so I have to keep doing this stuff. So, okay, so no disclosures. And what are we trying to do today? I think by the end of the presentation, I'm sure you all might have gone through this. I think there are a couple of slides which show in the past why NIH is becoming difficult, the funding climate has become difficult. So understanding a little bit about the background of that, identifying major alternate funding resources other than federal grants. And then what I really want to end is everyone have a strategy. Like how do you develop a strategy to approach this climate environment of low funding? I think obviously NIH is the high bar. You want to keep that up, but there are other sources, and there are methods that could be applied for getting funding. Again, effective approaches. I think I really want all of you all, at the end of the day, you all should have, look, this is what I'm going to see and try to do. And I give one example here. I don't know whether the internet, the Wi-Fi will work on this one, but we'll try. Again, utilize grant databases and resources to identify appropriate funding. I think I'll go through some of the tools that are out there, both AI and non-AI, to help with trying to find funding that are available. So again, why look beyond NIH? I think most of you all know the answer for that. What's happened over the last 2 or 3 years has become really competitive. The funding diversity, you have to have a diversification right now because you're doing risk management. And then there have been a lot of uncertainties, okay? Especially if you're an academic center, the indirects have been at cap. They've been trying to cap the indirects at 15%. Most hospital universities would get an indirect around 52. So basically, the hospital gets 52% of what the grant is coming in. Now they're trying to cap it. They're still not, I think they put injunction to that order, but that's what the government was trying to do, cap it at 15%. So the hospital gets only 15%, and that's not profitable for the universities. So again, look for the complementary funding sources out there, which are usually less competitive than NIH grants. And you actually might have more flexibility in implementation. NIH is pretty rigid, and then I think you have, it's really good to have a good background with that aim in mind, but then the other lower fundings, lower bars that you can hit, and keep it going so that you're just not having an empty bank because you don't have NIH funding. Okay, these are the recent changes I talked about, new indirect courses, new review criteria. I think when you do the mock drill, we'll be using the new review criteria. I think there's heightened competition going on, and you need to have a strategic approach. So you can see the diagram out there. It's really small out there, but what you can see in maroon, like dark maroon, are all the places where funding hit. It's around $16 billion, and around 68,000 people were affected by that USAID cuts and the other cuts that are going on. So when you look at the other diagram, the chart out here, you can see that 66% of funding is actually federal funding. And there's around 9.3, which is the education institutes, and then you have the government, and then you have business, industry, and then your foundation, which is only 5.96%. And this was in 2024. That has changed a little bit. That has changed because obviously NIH has come down a little bit, foundations have gone up a little bit, and have not shown industry partners out here, have not shown pharmaceutical companies and all that sort of. I'll talk a little bit about that, but in a later chart, I'll show what the ratio is with that to NIH and talk a little bit about that. So this all has led to finding funding becoming really difficult, okay? And as an academician, as a researcher, I think that's going to be key. I think your department, after 2 or 3 years of supporting you, is going to tell, okay, we need to get some funding. You get some pilot projects done, you get some initial research out, but then eventually you need to get some funding for your department. So I think you need to have a strategy. I think the strategy that I've been mentoring my residents and fellow is, I have a plan to keep getting funded. So however be it. So figure out how your plan is going to be. So if you have already got a fund, start planning for the next fund even before your first fund dries out. So second year of the current funding, you should start planning for your next funding. You shouldn't try to get your manuscript out and then try for your funding. You should be starting as you're moving along. Again, maintain multiple applications. I think that's really important. I think if you want to get consistently funded, you need to get multiple applications in. Just to break the monotony, like what do you think is the percentage of success rate for young? I just had a feel it looks like you're all young researchers. So what do you think is the success rate of a young researcher applying for a grant? I'm not talking about NIH, I'm just applying for a grant. What do you think is the success rate? Just throw some numbers out there.
5%.
5? You're being too strict. No.
20 to maybe 1 in 5 to 1 in 3.
15%, yeah. 15% is not bad. That's all over. Like 15% is a pretty good percentage. Like if you're a new researcher and if you did the right approach, you actually have a 15% chance of getting funded. Be it intramural funding, extramural funding, foundation funding, that's irrelevant. But the fact is you're getting funded. Okay, NIH funding would be close to 2% or 3%, I would say, even less than that. So I think that's why you need to keep your portfolio open when you're applying for funding. Okay, again, very important to strategize. Okay, this is a no-brainer. You have to publish. If you're in academics and you're a researcher, you have to publish. You have to make sure that your research is visible. So publish as a first author, corresponding author, last author, and leverage publication to demonstrate impact. Always try to showcase your publication in some sort of media, and then have some sort of impact with your publication. I think those are really important things when you start working towards. Again, build a track record in targeted research area, creating a niche. I'm sure all of your mentor will tell you, like, don't put your hand in all the buckets. Like, focus on an area that you feel you want to be focusing on, and just keep working at it. If you feel nothing's happening, after some time you can divert a little bit. Okay, importance of diversifying. Again, I told you the issues with the NIH. There are different review processes and success rates are different. And these are, and the thing is, like, NIH has got like specific times when they have the ROIs out. But when you look at the other foundations, they have varying funding cycles. So throughout the year, you can find places who are accepting your applications. So you don't have to wait only for 1 time or 2 times a year to be applying. You could be applying throughout the year. The key is figuring out who are all the players in your area of interest, and then just keep tapping onto that and keep applying. And again, faster decisions and also a few restrictions on preliminary data. Okay, so this is a busy slide showing the foundation, but these are the important ones that are out there, major players for foundation. I think these are names that you should know, but I think when you reach out to them, they'll say, if you reach out to Gates right now, they'll say maternal child health is my focus area. So if you have a project on maternal child health, then you're lucky, but if you don't, then they might have a small area ER that they might be wanting to tap into, maybe disaster, and you might be able to fit in. So again, what is the key? The key is reaching out to them. So either go to the websites or reach out to the program managers to figure out what exactly they are looking for and whether what you are trying to do is matching with what they are looking for. Again, Chan Zuckerberg, Wellcome Trust. Wellcome Trust is really important now, especially after NIH funding came down. Wellcome Trust has actually increased the funding for research. So, and it's got a really broad variety of topics that they cover. So I think that's an option that really should. Robert Wood Johnson's for cardiovascular, I think also for non-communicable, like all non-communicable diseases, Doris Duke. Charitable junior researchers, I think that's, if you haven't heard of Doris Duke, look it up. I think they're really open to young investigators and supporting them. And the Thrasher for if you're doing pediatric research. Okay, so other than these large private foundations, they're actually state foundations, and then there are local health foundations. I think most of you all should look into these local health foundations. So if I'm in Michigan, and we have Michigan Health Foundation, Michigan Endowment Foundation. And they're really, really good for young researchers. They give like somewhere in the order of 100,000 to 500,000, okay? And that's actually really good to start off. And I think they're really low bar. So if you're interested in doing, and actually the Michigan Endowment is community, but actually you can tweak your proposal to be more community, even if it's academic. So depending on how you write your proposal, I think we talked a little bit about that. So there's cancer prevention if you're interested in oncology, regenerative medicine, biomedical research these are the state, and then you have local. And then local, you have the hospital foundation, like we have from DMC, you have DMC Foundation. So again, you have to look into your system. Okay, it's very important that start looking locally. I think Joe Miller, when he did his presentation, would have said the same thing. Okay, start locally, start intramural, start at the university level, start at your hospital level, start at your state level. Okay, there are lots of possibilities. Blue Cross Blue Shield, really low-hanging fruit. Okay, and they give pretty good funding for young investigators. So those are the things that you should really be trying, and they're all around like through the year. So they have a recurring cycle going on. Okay, then there are some economic development and state universities, some internal grants, okay? So, so preparation for successful, I think you have to have your, match your values and priorities to those of the foundation missions. I think that's really important. And how do you do that? And you do that by reviewing prior grants, and all of these are available. So if you go to any of these organizations out there, and you can reach out to the project manager, there's usually a person out there. One number will be there, one email will be there, reach out to them, and they'll actually give you access to prior grants. Okay, and if you have a grant officer in your department, they should be able to do it. Get prior grants. So if you're applying to Gates Foundation, you find an area of interest, you can ask the person, like, has prior applications similarly been given? And they will actually give you some of the applications that will be obviously de-identified. Okay, so, and you can also look at the funding pattern. So if you're looking for something on hypertension or pulmonary embolism, and just last year somebody got it, you're not going to get it this year. Okay, so you need to start looking at the pattern. Like if nobody has got a grant on pulmonary hypertension and over the last 5 or 6 years, and they're doing cardiovascular, okay, this is a good time to apply for it. It's 5 years is usually a good time to reapply for a similar project. And I think very important to look at the strategic plans for these companies. Again, it is a little bit of effort, but I think it's effort that pays off in the long run. Okay, so these are other ways, like when you're looking at foundations. So once you start connecting with the foundations, you will get a good relation. You will develop a good relationship. So Dr. Levy, who's my mentor, he's like a foundations guru. Like he's been getting foundations grant like in the millions, and the only reason he gets that is because of his relationship. Okay, so over time, you develop a relationship with board members and figure out what their interests are, and then see whether any interest is matching with what your interests, and then figure out the grant cycles, their deadlines, make sure you stick to them. Again, geographic priorities are very, very important. I think some are very regional-oriented grants, so make sure that you focus on what they're looking for, and obviously looking at the grant amounts in the past will match what you are looking for. Okay, so then this is a very basic slide. There are research grants, the fellowships, the equipment, infrastructural grants, the educational grants, the travel grants, like the different types of grants out there. Again, this is similar to what I said before, aligning your project with the foundation strategic goal. Again, finding a mission or relevant plan which is parallel to what the foundation's mission is. And then geographical priorities, and look beyond health and medical foundations. Again, so when you think of foundations, we're only looking at health and medical, but actually there are lots of non-medical organizations who are willing to fund. Now Google is a big funder for health-related activities, especially with AI coming. If you have anything to do with AI, Google, Amazon are there, like they're really putting in a lot of money for health-related with AI. So again, opportunities, I didn't have that out here, but those are opportunities that if you have anything to do with AI, you should be looking at one of those three. Okay, again, strategies. Again, I cannot reiterate that it's really important to develop a contact and talk to the people before applying. If you just randomly apply for a grant to one of these organizations, the chances that you're successful is very, very low. Okay, so you should reach out to the people, develop a contact, ask them for some informal meeting, set up a one-on-one meeting with the people, and then after the meeting, you'll get a better idea what they will actually they might just tell you, sorry, we don't have something which fits what you're trying to do, and that's fine. Just move on, and then look for other people who don't waste your time on that person. So again, it's very important to do that first call and make that relationship go and take the relationship forward. Again, networking is important. Okay, other is follow them now with social media. LinkedIn is so important. I think if you don't have a LinkedIn account and you're looking at foundations, you should get a LinkedIn account. I think you see a lot of what that company is doing. You can track what their plans are, their strategies are, just by looking at their account. And connect through institutional advancement offices if you have one, and attend. They all have foundational webinars, especially when they're coming up with a new scheme or new grant module, they have webinars. So if you keep up with their website, you'll come to know all that. So again, it sounds like it's a lot. Like, why are we doing so much? I think it sounds a lot, but actually it doesn't take that much time. I think to do all that I've told you all to do right now won't take you more than 2 or 3 hours. Okay, so like dedicated time. Okay, reaching out, figuring out, using AI to sort of wean it down. I'll give you an example how I've used AI to wean down some of my grant proposal. And I think it's a really good use of AI rather than using it to plagiarize stuff. Okay, proposal and communication, follow guidelines. Again, these are really important. Focus on outcomes, use accessible language. I think we went through this the whole day. We were talking about how a good proposal should come out. So I'm not going to go through this again and how to write a good proposal and good specific aims. What's really important is post-award. I think once you get the award, don't break connection with that foundation. I think post-award is really important when it comes to foundation. Keeping that connection going, making sure that you give them updates on what has happened with your project, put them on the manuscript, show that they were funded, they are funders of yours, give conflict of interest if it has to, but give them acknowledgement, and then build towards a long-term partnership. So I've got 3 Blue Cross Blue Shield grants, and I think that would not have happened if I had not built a connection. Like every time I finished one Blue Cross, I would reach out to them and say, this is what I've got now, and this is my publication that has come out of it. And then a few months later, I would apply for another grant as a follow-up for the first grant, and I would get it. So the reason they're giving it to me is because they know that this guy has already performed, and he's sort of acknowledging the work that we have been helping him get, or do in that area. Again, make sure that you follow the requirements that they have for reporting, and reporting very meticulously. Okay, so this one is a little bit tricky. Okay, so I think when I talk to my residents, they say the dark side. So the industry collaboration, I think, is very, very tricky. So there are lots of reasons that you need to be careful when you start doing a project with the industry. Okay, so there's clinical trial sponsorship, there's technological development partnership, there's public-private consortia, and there's always biotech and pharmaceutical. For doing something in this realm, I think you should have a really good setup in your shop. You cannot just be a one-man shop and go and say that, okay, with a pharmaceutical company that we want to work with you in doing some sort of collaborative research, or we'll run some of your phase 3s or phase 4 trials in our department. It won't work like that. So you should work on developing a little bit of an infrastructure to be able to pull it off. And they sometimes actually help you. So they will help you build that infrastructure, but then that is the investment that you have to do if you want to be involved in like industry partnership. Again, it's really important that you navigate it appropriately. So it's important to set up the shop, but it's not difficult to set up the shop. if you're not careful. And you could go 10 years down the line without even one publication if you just be like a liaison for running clinical trials. Okay, so you could just be doing clinical trials one after the other, 10 years, you get some interact, you get a lot of funding, but your career has done nothing. Okay, and that's a really important thing that you have to make sure that does not happen. So again, IP is important, publication agreements. So the first 4 years, obviously I got handout from Levy, who's my mentor. He had a lot of industry trials, just handed them off to me, and I took them over. The first 4 years, I didn't realize this was happening. But then after that, I realized that was happening. When I had new contracts coming in, the first thing I would tell them is that I need to be able to get my publications from these. Like I could do a sub trial, or subcontract, they'll never put you as first author or last author unless you have come up with the idea. But if it's a sub study of the original study with the data that they're given, they might let you be the first trial in that. So there have been a few heart failure studies where they have let me be in the first or last author. So again, you have to be really careful when you're negotiating with the industry. Again, this doesn't happen straight off the bat. It takes some time to build that reputation. So I think if you invest on that time in the reputation and are able to build the shop in your center, then I think you might be able to get there. Again, make sure you're careful about your conflict of interest. So now, anyone interested in global health out here? Okay, wonderful. Most difficult place to get funding, okay? But I think that there are ways you can do it. There are lots of international players. Don't think you have to be US-centric. You're global health. Don't think US-centric. You can be Europe-centric. You can apply for a grant in Europe. You can apply for a grant in Canada. All you need to get is collaborator. You get a collaborator from one of those countries, because most of the grants will not come to you. It'll come to a collaborator in that country, but you can be the co-PI on that study. Okay, and you can do most of the, the way you do the budgeting, you can decide how you want to do the budgeting. You could be the main person, but you have to have some person from the other country also on that grant. Okay, so there's European Commission Horizon programs, WHO is a good funder, Human Frontier Services, and then there's European Developing Countries, UK Medical Research, Canadian International Collaborators. There are grants out there, but very few for the US. Okay, I think as an American researcher, when you apply for global grants, I think it's a big roadblock. So you just have to think about how you're going to go around that roadblock. Okay, so I think we went through this slide in the morning. Joe Miller did that. I think institutional grants, very important to know what is there intramurally. So there'll be a bridge funding grant, there'll be seed grants, there are core faculty grants, specialization equipment funding. So I just got, one of my fellows, he got enrolled in a disaster medicine fellowship. So he's a GEM fellow. And it's a $60,000 fellowship. And so we didn't want to pay for it, and he didn't want to pay for it, but we wanted him to do it. So we just went to the hospital and told them that we really feel that this guy is a really good asset to develop disaster medicine in our hospital, and is there some money you have for faculty development? And they said that they will give half if department gives half. And so it's got 30,000. I would prefer giving 30,000 than 60,000. So things like that happen. So you should just be open to the idea and then approach your intramural organization. Okay, so again, co-investigator is not a bad thing. Co-investigator as a junior investigator is really important to get your feet wet and start getting some grants in. So piggyback off investigator and get in as a co-investigator. The multi-site grants are really important, and now most of the organizations are looking for multi-site grants. Again, you can do program, you can do center grants. I think these are grants that are available out there, which we can look into. Again, I'm just going to go through the next couple of slides because we're going close to time. Supplemental funding, like diversity equipment supplement, administrative supplements. Again, the contract, you can take a sub-grant to do a contract for a main grant. Again, the industry service and technical consultant. I'm not going to go through much of that. So I think I want to spend maybe 3 minutes on strategic planning. I think there are two types of approaches. There's a portfolio approach, and there's a sequential application approach. The portfolio's approach is building a strong portfolio. Okay, so basically keep doing things in one area and building a portfolio, and balancing the high risk funding with the stable funding. Try to get a mix of federal, foundation, industrial support, and continue a pipeline development. So I think going in one direction, just straightforward in one pipeline, keep applying and moving forward, and then also doing a sequential application timeline. So I think creating a timeline which is sequential, okay, rather than not just doing one large grant and sitting on laurels, but actually at the moment you get one grant, start moving towards the next and anticipate what is going to happen with the next grant. Okay, again, application tips, matching funding to missions, aligning research goals to funder interest, tailoring application, all same things. And then building relationship, we already went through that. A couple of things like websites I really want you all to go and look in. If you haven't heard of Grant Forward, you should be looking at Grant Forward. Okay, that's one of the best AI-powered software that's out there that can help you locate the grant that'll fit what you're looking for. Okay, there's a cost to it, but most of the institutes have paid the cost, so they will have a subscription. And if you're doing individual subscriptions, it's not that much, but it's worth it. And then the other groups like Pivot, RP, and Spin. Okay, so I'm going to see if this opens up. I hope it does. So this is what I did. I cannot open up. That's sad. Okay, so what I did was I asked Cloud AI, and since it's not opening up, I'll share the slides with you. And so I asked Cloud AI. So I'm a global health practitioner. I want to look at the UN sustainable goals. So they said 17 sustainable goals for UN. I'm looking at the UN sustainable goals. This is what I've done. This is my work that I've done over the last 15 years. Match my work to the sustainable goals and pull out all the grants that are there in that area. You have seen it did such a good job. So I'm not telling you that just believe what it said, but it actually got high priority, low priority, mid priority, high equity, more chances that I'll get in. And then you click on that box, it tells you why in your CV or in your portfolio this fits the sustainable goal. And then it gives you a list of the possible grantees. Then you do your homework. Then you go to each of these grantees and you start looking into the back. So it actually sort of breaks it down. And this is exactly what Grant Forward does. Grant Forward does exactly the same thing. It pulls, you put in all your information and then breaks it down through an algorithm and then comes up with what grants fit what you would like to apply for. So I think I think I'm done with time, but I'd like to stop out here. The next couple of slides are not that important. And I just wanted to share this study, which sort of gives you an idea about what funders prefer. So I think, so when you're writing a grant, what type of funding would you prefer? This was a study done by Stephanie Paul, and she said 68% of grant writers actually preferred applying to private foundations. Okay, only 9% preferred applying to the NIH. Okay, so and then which funder do you win most often with? Again, you can see out here, private is around 56% and federal is around 12%. So it's really difficult. So this is just one study, but actually federal is more difficult. So this is just one study. But then if you look at this chart out, you can see out here where the money is coming from. The money you can see is actually industry. The majority of the money for doing research is actually industry. And that's the one as clinician we try to avoid the industry because of the set with it. And then NIH, the federal funding is actually quite a big chunk. And then it's not bad, the non-profit and foundations, actually not that bad. They're like around 1/5 of what NIH is giving. This is the latest one, 2025. They're 1/5 of what NIH is giving. And it's much easier to apply, and it's much more probable that you'll get it. Okay, I'd like to stop here. Thank you. Any questions? Go ahead.
So as we're applying to multiple different things, can you talk a little bit about how to avoid overlap?
So again, there is that risk of overlap. I think the NIH has strict regulations about like not applying when you have applied for one, but foundation does not have that much of an overlap. But I think you need to be careful about not applying one grant to 3 people. Or 2 people. You apply one grant, it's sequential. You apply one grant, get it. And the advantage of foundation is they respond really back. Within a month, you'll know you're accepted. It's not an NIH, you wait for 3 months. It's like within a month, you know that you're getting it or not getting it, and then you move on to the next one, next grant that you get. So you always create like a sequential, like these are the 3 places I'm going to apply for. I'll apply for this one first. If it doesn't go, next, and go on. Any other questions?
Overlap is something that awarded grants have issues with. It's not about proposals. So it's a good problem to have to sort out if you've got 2 funded things that have some degree of overlap. And there are ways to mediate that as you do that. So don't feel like ideally you want to try to avoid getting into that situation, but also if you felt like there were 2 really good opportunities to apply
How many of you all have actually applied for foundation grants? Yeah. Yeah, you all should all, if you all have a research study, I think that's such a low-hanging fruit. I think just do your homework and you should apply for a foundation grant. Thank you. Thank you.
All right, so our next step is we are going to do a mock grant review. So we have a group of panelists, which I don't know if they all, we have a primary electrician, so I guess I'm going to have a chair. You can sit here. So are these working now? Can you guys hear us? Doesn't sound like you can. Is there a volume?
Yeah, they're working now.
Okay,
So are you our moderator?
I will be the moderator.
Great, all right.
I'm the tertiary.
Second, that's fine. Oh, sorry. All right.
This one? Yeah.
Do you want me to start?
Yeah, why don't you, are you going to start?
All right, so the purpose of this next section is to kind of provide a demonstration of what goes on behind the curtain, so to speak. And we are going to do a mock study section for a grant. It's actually going to be the grant that you guys received the specific aims for earlier, which was the Stanton grant. It's actually a real grant. I don't remember what the status of it was, whether it's funded or in process. I think it's still in process. Is it funded? Okay, great. So obviously this was a successful one. So we're going to try to come through and arrange this just like this would be discussed if this came to a study section of the NIH or anywhere else. We can kind of treat this, I think, as an open thing in some respects. So there is the last section of any review that happens at the NIH is going to be questions from the study section members. So we'll consider you guys study section members. And that can actually be a really informative time to get to some of the flushing out the issues with the grant, because most of the study section members have not read the entire grant, but based on the discussion, maybe have questions for the people that did. So we can kind of treat that the same way. We're going to try to do this within the next 20, 25 minutes, just because Colin has to get to something else at 4. So we're going to.
We're also supposed to be.
And
it's
you
supposed
should.
to be 15
Ideally,
minutes.
you should do this in 15 to 20 minutes for each grant. So the way the study section works is there is a not necessarily a moderator, they're the study section chair that keeps the meeting moving along with the research officer or the review officer, who is the person that's actually the one that arranged the study section, but the chair does most of the work. So I'm going to take that role for this. And at each grant, as it's reviewed, before the grant that is going to be discussed will be discussed, that individual will look for any noted conflicts of interest for that grant and ask those people to step out of the room, or if you're on Zoom, we'll ask them to be brought to an ante-room so they can't see the discussion, which kind of prevents any crossover for people that had a conflict of interest that sat on the study section from being involved in that. I guess, do we need to go back even a bigger step? So before you even get to discussing a grant, the 3 primary reviewers that read the grant will give their scores. And based on that, the review officer will make some triage decisions. The top ones will be discussed. The ones that scored lower will not be discussed. So we are going to assume that that has already occurred here and that this grant was scored high enough by the preliminary reviewers to be discussed. And then we would be progressing to that. We may have started with it in the day, but we're going to just assume that we have completed a few other grant reviews, and we're going to step into the review now for this grant. So we'll get started now. So the next grant to discuss is Catherine Stanton's grant, a pragmatic randomized, I don't even have the whole title in front of me here. Do you have the title, Colin?
I do. A pragmatic, randomized, adaptive clinical trial to investigate controlling alcohol-related harms in a low-income setting, emergency department brief interventions in Tanzania.
Great. So this is a grant from an established investigator, and we are going to ask anybody with a conflict of interest to step out, which we would have done that at this point in time. We'll just reassess and make sure that nobody has any remaining conflicts of interest. Great. All right, we're going to move forward. So the next step is we will, as the study section chair, we will get the preliminary scores from the individual reviewers, which will give us some context as the members of the study section on how people felt about this grant even before we start the discussion. So I'll go ahead and ask you guys for your preliminary scores. Dr. Greineder, I think you're the
3.
Primary reviewer.
Yep, 3.
Yep, 3.
Okay. Dr. Chen?
3.
3. Wow. So a lot of agreement on this grant. So we'll go ahead and start the discussion.
Okay,
Dr. Greineder, go
great,
ahead.
yes. So this is as Dr. Mudd mentioned, a grant from an established investigator that aims to evaluate and optimize a emergency department-based brief alcohol intervention named PPK, which stands for something in Swahili, reduce alcohol for your health in Swahili. And this will be done in Tanzania, and the design is a pragmatic randomized adaptive clinical trial, or PRACT. And the overall goal here is to reduce alcohol use and alcohol-related harms in the low-resource setting of Tanzania. So the background here is that this investigator, the principal investigator, had a NIHK award during which they developed PPK, this intervention, and they have some preliminary data showing that this brief 15-minute nurse-led intervention was actually effective. In that setting, in that limited setting. And now they want to establish effectiveness in a real-world, pragmatic clinical trial so that this can really be translated across multiple settings. And so AIM-1, they're going to test the effectiveness of that core intervention, the PPK, using alcohol-related, trying to remember what the name of their primary outcome is, the DRINC, it's a scoring system for alcohol-related use and consequences. And in AIM-2, they're going to, and also in AIM-1, they're going to identify biologic and psychosocial moderators of response to that intervention. And then in AIM-2, they're going to try to optimize the intervention using a secondary, or actually 2 different augmentation methods that are basically mobile health messages, either a standard one or a personalized booster, and they're going to try to figure out which of those provides the greatest benefit. So I obviously, based on my score, thought this was a very strong grant. My factor 1 score was actually 2, and I think that there is a lot of strength in the clear and compelling significance here. There's a strong epidemiologic framing that clearly in Tanzania there is a huge problem with alcohol-related injury, with percentages as high as 30% suffering alcohol use disorder and alcohol-related harm. I think this addresses a real implementation gap, so a knowledge gap in how to best implement a ED-based intervention like this. And I really think the fact that it's a real-world setting in low-resource setting are both impressive and really well-aligned with the NIAAA. I think that other strengths include the very innovative, pragmatic, adaptive clinical trial design, and the feasibility based on the fact that they've already done work in country and found a signal with this intervention is pretty compelling. In terms of weaknesses, they were mostly in factor 2, and I felt that they largely were around the statistical underdevelopment of the adaptive design. They do a pretty detailed sample size calculation, but I just feel like the adaptation rules are described more sort of conceptually and not really rigorously from a statistical standpoint. And in particular, handling things like multiplicity across these multiple aims and these different interim looks that they're going to do to decide which interventions they're going to drop and which are going to be continued. There's also a lot of comment about simulation driving their sample size, and the simulation is not well described. So I thought that was a weakness that moderated my factor 2 score. I also think that the primary outcome is fairly weak. I think that if you were doing a trial in a high resource setting on reducing alcohol-related harms and your primary outcome was a self-reported scale, that would be viewed as problematic, and I think it should be viewed that way in this setting as well. Obviously, self-reported scales, when it comes to things like alcohol use, suffer from social desirability bias, and they're usually backed up by real consumption, objective consumption measures, which they don't have here. So I think those were the two major, or I would say those are minor to moderate weaknesses that drove my factor 2 score down, but obviously still very enthusiastic about the fact that this work should be done and the feasibility of the project. And I'll stop there.
Great. Thanks, Dr. Greineder. Dr. Kumar, just to emphasize the points that were different than Dr. Greineder's.
I think Colin covered most of the points that I had. I think 3M approach, like how he said, it's definitely a critical public health issue, especially in the North Carolina region. The alcoholism, I think there's definitely an important project that should be conducted out there. But again, I have very similar reservations to Colin's as to the actual implementation or converting the phenotype to actual clinical results. So I think I think a big factor that I thought in my weakness was you're actually doing the phenotype with this AUBDT. I keep forgetting the AUBPT. But I think what does that result to in real life? I don't see that much in this application. So I think that's if that could have been done, it would have been good. So it's unclear how this will overcome the barriers to treatment beyond the identification. I think you do the identification of the phenotype, and then how does that lead to the next steps? It's not very clear. The gamification part, I don't think details of the gamification were clearly outlined. I would like to see a little bit more details about those, the gamification. I think those are the strengths, the weaknesses. I think the strengths, obviously, Colin outlined them pretty well. Innovation, definitely. Again, the one last weakness that I thought was I would like to have more details on the task development and clearer mapping of task when you talk about the domains that they're talking about. So I think it gave an overview of the domains, but not clearly defined what tasks are there in each domain and how that's going to be implemented. So I think overall, a great study and submission, very important to be done. I think a little tweaking in the approach and the final outcome would have been good.
Perfect. Thanks, Dr. Kumar. And Dr. Chen, just any differences from the first two reviewers?
Yeah, so the factor 1, I gave a 2. It's addressing an important issue. It's highlighting disseminated implementation of alcohol-based intervention that we really need currently with research, and they're focusing on a low-income setting. We know what's going on with the high-income setting, but we definitely need to know more about low-income settings. Now, factor 2, I agree with Colin, in that this is the main weakness of this study. So instead of enrolling 1,098, they're only enrolling 520 people using this adaptive method. And so with that problem is that, this might be misleading and overestimating bias. So they are essentially adapting whatever results that they're getting. It may inflate early benefit, and they may stop too early and reduce sample size. And the final effect may be smaller, or it may disappear. And so the smaller sample size that they're reducing is reducing reliability and generalizability. So you're increasing type 1 error when you do that, and then Dr. Staten argued that ethically, this is ensuring that most patients receive this potential beneficial intervention, but this treatment may not be effective, and there might be expected harm that we're not catching when they're reducing the numbers. So my biggest concern about this is the approach. And then at the end, Dr. Staten is a good team assembled. So factor 3, I gave a 1. Yep, that's all I have to.
Perfect. Thank you, reviewers. So now we'll open it up to the study section. Are there any specific questions about this particular proposal?
Well, we did this, yep, we did that earlier. Yep.
Dr. Chen, I was going to press a little bit harder on what you said at the end. Did they say what because I wasn't very clear from Dr. Greineder and your points on this, did they say specifically what they would do in this adaptive design to make these decisions to reduce the sizes? Were there very objective criteria? Because it seemed like from Dr. Greineder's description that there weren't any specific criteria, or at least they weren't as clear as he would have liked.
Yeah, they did not define it well. All they said was, we're going to be reviewing monthly, but they did not say.
They didn't say what the criteria would be?
No, not
Okay.
that I.
Thank you.
Yeah.
And just to clarify my criticism, I think there are well-defined criteria. I just am
Okay.
concerned about all these interim looks
I see.
and the impact that that's going to have on their statistics. I think I agree with Dr. Chen that I think they're going to end up being underpowered.
Great. Any other specific question? Yeah, go ahead.
So this being a mock study section, we don't have access to their full
They didn't give us the
application.
team or the biosketches.
Yeah.
We
But
hope so,
certainly
yes.
that would be a key thing, especially someone
We'll give them credit for that.
That has expertise in adaptive clinical trial design, because I feel like it is a cool thing, but then belies sort of the complexity of doing something like this properly.
Great. So seeing no other questions, we'll go ahead and revisit scores at this stage following the discussion. So Dr. Greineder?
I really want to change my score.
scored
I
a
probably
3
wouldn't in
initially.
real life, but I'm going to change my score because this is just to show you guys how this happens. Let's say that one of them had raised a weakness that I hadn't thought of before. I'd be like, oh, I see. Well, in consideration of what Dr. Kumar said, I'm going to lower my score to a 4,
Great.
for example.
Dr. Kumar?
Yeah, I think I'll stay at 3.
3, great. Dr. Chen?
I'm staying at a 3 as well.
Great. So for the rest of the study section, for this proposal entitled "A Pragmatic Randomized Adaptive Clinical Trial to Investigate Controlling Alcohol-Related Harms in Low-Income Settings, Emergency Department Brief Interventions in Tanzania," we have a range of 3 to 4. So please place a 3 or 4 in your markings for this particular application. And otherwise, if you want to go outside that range, please speak up and verbally say what your reasoning is for that.
Yeah, so these are key. Again, we're sort of breaking form here, but these are key differences amongst different study sections. So in EMF and SAMF, we actually allow people to go 1 point on either side of the scored range from the reviewers. So if we had scored 4, 3, 3 like we did, the range would be 2 to 5. In NIH, it's typically 3 to 4.
Yeah,
and if you haven't said anything during the discussion,
You can't score it.
and you're planning on, going outside the range, because that's a bit of a problem. That'll raise some flags. So generally, you'll know who's going to go outside range, or there'll be some questions raised, and then if a couple people will raise their hand to vote outside of range, and then they'll just say based on the discussion that was held, based on the concerns that were identified, that kind of thing.
Great. And then after we would get scores put in, we'd
That's
ask
it.
if there are any concerns about non-scoring criteria, budgetary concerns, or human subject protection concerns.
That's right, and different reviewers have different responsibilities. Since the primary reviewer does the biggest job at the beginning, generally the secondary reviewer will talk about things like human subjects and vertebrate animals, and then the tertiary reviewer will do completely non-scorable factors like budget and
And they
authentication
can recommend
of
changes
resources.
too, but they don't affect
Yeah.
the score
Yeah.
at this
Yeah.
stage.
So I have no concerns about those things.
Great.
No concerns.
No concerns.
We had no budget, so it's easy enough. Perfect. So we'll let everybody else back into the room that was conflicted for that, and then we'll move on to the next proposal. So that's kind of a short summary. Usually the study section chair will also give a brief summary of the discussion. They sometimes do it better or worse during the meeting. Typically, they will be dictating something just to give themselves a reminder, but the study section chair will actually be responsible for writing a summary of what that discussion was. after it happens, and that will be the top of the summary statement. That way you get specific feedback on the biggest concerns raised were the statistics of the adaptive clinical trial design and the primary outcome being not a very strong, or not viewed as a very strong variable. So you will have that feedback information, and that will come from the summary statement that's generated by the study section chair. But otherwise, that is the process. And it can go just that fast, and when you have a good study section. Sometimes it does not. Questions?
Yeah, do people have any questions about it?
Yeah, go ahead.
I'm wondering how common it is for there to be discrepant views for people who are like closer to the alcohol area of expertise versus not. And if so, is there kind of like more context? Is there a discussion where, someone works in an area much closer to the proposal, they provide additional context, or like how that kind of discussion goes if there's some weakness?
There's usually not a who's the bigger expert disagreements. I think the people where I've seen those disagreements happen, they make their objective critiques, and they either objectively rebut those critiques or they don't. And it kind of depends, because oftentimes some of the experts are not the primary reviewers, and maybe they haven't read the entire proposal. So they can ask very specific objective questions of the experts that did review it. But then they make their own judgment. So sometimes in study sections we'll have statistics people that will ask very specific questions, and they say that this is critical for them to review the validity of that. And if the primary reviewers didn't see it included within the proposal, then that could be a gap for that person, and they may decide to go outside the range for that reason. Have you seen other?
I basically have nothing to add to that. That was perfect. I will say, though, that I have been involved just actually a month ago, and I'd given a proposal of 2, and I think the other scores were 4 and 7, so it was like huge range. And Philip didn't mention this, but I rescued the proposal. The proposal was initially triaged in that if you average, I don't know what 2 + 4 + 7 divided by 3 is. I should know, but whatever. It's not good. It's not good enough. And the thing got triaged, and I was like, this is insane. This is a fantastic grant. And so I rescued it, and then I really sort of was pretty unhappy with the person who gave a 7, because their justification was, well, I'm not sure this is going to work. And I'm like, we're a pharmacology study section, that this is not our major question. Is this going to work? That's not what we're asking. That's why we do the proposal, right? So that's why we fund the proposal. So we got into it, and then no one changed their score. So it came to the end, and I was like, I'm sticking with the 2, and she was like, I'm sticking with the 7. And but as Philip said, it was never about expertise. It was just about a fundamental, and I mean, like, there's a lot of pressure, peer pressure in study sections, which is a good thing. You do not want to come across like a total arrogant, what, and you don't want to pull rank on, like, I know more than you or something like that, because the reality is that's probably not the case. So.
And it's a voting section, so the key and how this works well is that the rest of the study section views those arguments, and as long as they stay objective, you're either motivated by them or you're not. And it will weigh out. Like, the most motivating argument for the most people in the study section is where that score will go. It will either be a 2 or a 7.
Yeah, and sometimes right.
And
then
sometimes they
everybody
dislike
votes
the
out of
7
range,
person
and you're
enough,
like,
so
yes.
Yeah.
But
or everybody hates the 7 argument so much
yeah.
that they're like, I'm going to give this a 2 just to spite that person.
Right.
So.
Yeah. You can generally tell based on how the discussion goes.
Yeah.
Which is why it's really important to, that the conflicts of interest are excluded,
Yeah.
and that we're all super confidential about all of it, right? Like, you never talk about anything outside of the study section. Any other questions? Yeah.
This might have been covered already, but it sounds like the range is dictated by the 3 primary reviewers. Is there a method of assigning reviewers? So, for example, is this completely random, or are people from certain specialties assigned to within the same study section, like preferentially to some studies?
Yeah, that's a big question. We probably have a half-hour answer to that. So the SROs in NIH study sections do that, and the good news is that everybody on that study section is usually an expert in the field. So I don't think there's a big concern about content expertise, right? You saw how specific some of these study sections are. Skeletal, SBSR, right? Like, everybody's an expert on skeletal biology and pharmacology, right? But I think it's more challenging in the context of emergency medicine study sections, because we have a very broad range of, and some of our grant mechanisms are not actually content driven, right? So we have the research training grant, and you might get a grant on there that's a medical education grant, and a grant that's an AI driven big data grant, a grant that's a basic science cell and mouse study, right? So I mean, it's hard to get that. We do try to match content expertise. Sometimes we're more successful than others.
I think on the SAEM Foundation study sections too, like we acknowledge that there's a very broad range of science that goes through there, and we include as best we can the subject experts that fit that the best. We actually go through the study sections and match people with, this is an ultrasound grant. That's usually fairly easy to do because there's a lot of people that designate that, but if there is components in there, usually the study section chair has read at least through the specific aims page, figured out what those specific things are that grant is going to be talking about, and matching with their interests of their whole study section members who it is. But we also are agnostic when it comes to the review, is that we may acknowledge that somebody that did not read the whole grant has a lot of expertise in this area, and we can question them after that to say, well, you've done this before, tell us what exactly we would need to look for here, and we could say if we saw that or not.
It's not uncommon for, let's say I was the primary reviewer, but Dr. Kumar here had a lot of expertise in doing, this kind of work. I might ask him a question. I wasn't so familiar with this technique. What did you think of it? That kind of thing. So it's very collegial, and I do think that we rely on each other's expertise pretty well.
These are great questions. Any other questions?
I wish we had Jeremy here, because Jeremy's great. He's actually a SRO, or he's a PO, whatever. And he'll be like, that was exactly what I see in the study section. So, but I think that held pretty well and it's that quick. It's over quickly. All right, thank you guys.
Brandon, did you want to give some concluding statements before we go into the last kind of free-for-all section?
All right, I'm going to step out. Thank you guys.
Well, thank you everyone for being here. And thank you for letting me sneak out for a couple hours this afternoon for a different thing I had to attend. Looking, as always, to make things better. So, for a moment, if you could scan this, asking for some quick slider ratings. You don't have to write anything about people, just give us a rough number. If you serve on a workshop in the future at some point, have your event coordinator get you a number, because a number by your performance on your CV means more than just putting the event. So part of this is allowing me to give the faculty that feedback so they can put on their CV. And then after that is some very simple questions of pluses and deltas, if you're familiar with the idea of what went well, what's good, what should we keep doing, and what didn't go so well, or what did you find frustrating, which would we make different. Give everybody about 60 seconds to do a few things on there. Got another 20 seconds. And again, if you don't finish, that's fine. All right, it looks like we're at about the 80th percentile of people looking up from their phones. I want to thank everyone who came today. It's a lot of time to sit and talk about grants, even if you like grants. This is a lot of time. It's also not probably the last time you should attend a grant writing workshop. If you actually want to get good at writing grants, this is, no different than thinking back to your medical school and how many times did you have to try to learn glycolysis, right? I'm not saying that's maybe what I did with medical school, but this is a skill. And so you'll get different opinions. There are several large national grant writing organizations that tend to come around to many universities and give talks once every couple years. They're good. They're all kind of very different. And so going to one group's presentation 2 consecutive years is probably not very helpful, but going to a couple different presentations to get different perspectives is probably pretty useful. At the conclusion of this, we have an hour to do whatever. That, for many people, it means you want to go move around and get some sunshine and go get a beverage. That's fine. But if there were a couple of you who approached me earlier and said you wanted to chat, now would be the time. If you've made connections during the day of, hey, somebody else who was doing ultrasound or med ed or simulation or whatever it is, we have this space. Happy to connect afterwards if you say, I'm too tired for right now, but I really want to follow up on something. Please email me. You should have my contact info. If you don't, I'm sure Melissa McMillan or any of the SAEM staff can point you in my direction. Thanks to the faculty, and otherwise I'd say we are more or less adjourned. All right. Thanks, everyone.